have jurisdiction over the work that they have done, even if it's not audit. So in the context of some of the forensic reports that we've been questioned on in the last few months, when the service had been delivered by somebody registered with the RBA, then we might have an opportunity to investigate that registered auditor, but we'll have to make sure that there's a link into the deliverable from the services that have been delivered. The importance, as the chairman mentioned, of our investigation is that it is an independent investigation, which means it hasn't been commissioned by anybody. It is in terms of our legislation, and therefore it makes it an independent, completely independent investigation. And of course, the RBA has no interest in the investigation except that we must protect the public interest. The purpose of the report back is to also really give you an update on exactly where we are. As the chairman mentioned, it's very difficult for us to report back on our findings so far because it might prejudice the case. But we do want to give the members the assurance that while we want to stay within our prescribed process, which I'll explain to you shortly, we do also want to see if we can complete some of the high public interest investigations within shorter time frames, because we know that would be in the public interest. We cannot divulge information regarding any details of the investigation, as it might prejudice the case. And what we have been doing in the last couple of weeks is also to try and calm the markets, because we think there has been a lot of, and I want to use the word noise, around what has been happening in the audit environment. And it's also important that we separate the noise from what actually needs to be done and what our mandate is. And therefore, we have been sending out messages to tell the market to just calm down and take decisions based on facts or on information that they do have at hand. Unfortunately, it's difficult to give them information about the case for them to use to take their decisions, but there is a lot of other information in the public domain that they could use. Now, if we're going to go back to the role of the RBA, it will put what we're doing into context. We protect the investing public through regulation and oversight. Now, our strength of our regulation must incite confidence in the market. And if there is strong regulation, then we will have confidence in our markets. And you would have read last week about our ranking by the World Economic Forum. Again, a very good example of when we are number one, it means that we have confidence in our financial markets. When we fall from number one, it means that confidence is lost in the financial markets. And that just means that we have to do a lot more to regain that confidence again. Now, a strong and effective regulator can enhance public perception and improve confidence, because remember, the World Economic Forum ranking is based on perceptions. And cooperation with other regulators will also assist in enhancing our effectiveness. Let me be more specific about the RBA's mandate to investigate. Our mandate is RBA's mandate to investigate alleged improper conduct of registered auditors arises from Section 41A of the Auditing Profession Act, Act number 26 of 2005, which states that the board must take steps to promote the integrity of the profession, including investigating improper conduct, conducting disciplinary hearings, and imposing sanctions for improper conduct. If I can just go back to the scope of our investigations and who we can cover, I should also mention that our scope includes investigation of auditors who audit public interest entities that fall within Section 4.3 of the Audit Act of the Auditor General. That means that it's the situation where the Auditor General contracts out work to private sector audit firms, and they also fall within our jurisdiction. So the board must take steps in terms of this section to promote the integrity of the profession, including investigating improper conduct, conducting disciplinary hearings, and imposing sanctions for improper conduct. Now again, the difference between our investigation and any other investigation, for example by the Institute, is that the outcome of the Institute's investigation will impact on the membership of those individuals. With the RBA, it will impact on whether we can take away their license or whether they can continue to audit. So that is the difference between the possible outcomes of the investigation, depending on whether the auditors are guilty or not. Just a little bit on the investigations process to explain how the process is, and this might give you some indication of the length of time that could be involved. We start the investigations process when we receive a complaint, and these complaints can be received in one of three ways. First of all, we could get a complaint from a member of the public or from other regulators or the courts. The Inspections Committee of the RBA can refer an auditor to our Investigations Department for further investigation, or it could be self-initiated, or what we refer to as mero motu cases. So when we see something in the press, for example, and we believe that there's also misconduct by the auditor, because the fact that there is irregularities at a client of an audit doesn't necessarily mean that there's been an audit failure. Once we can make a connection or there's complaints against the auditor, then we can start an investigation internally. The complaints are investigated if there's prima facie evidence of improper conduct by an RA, and as I've said there, not necessarily if there's complaints or there's anything in the news about what is happening at the client of the auditor. There has to be evidence or prima facie evidence that there's been improper conduct by the auditor. The investigating committee, which is an independent committee of the RBA, then considers the evidence and makes recommendations on outcome of a matter to the Disciplinary Advisory Committee. This is not the Disciplinary Committee. This is a subcommittee of the board, and they will receive the recommendations from the Investigations Committee. And the Disciplinary Advisory Committee will then consider these recommendations from the Investigations Committee, and they will make a final decision on the matter. Now, that final decision can be one of three decisions. The matter, they could decide that the matter is not prosecuted, which means that the matter is dismissed. They could decide that the matter is prosecuted via a consent order. That means the auditor admits guilt and pays a fine. Or they can decide that the matter is referred for a disciplinary hearing to another committee, the Disciplinary Committee. An investigation can take, on average, 18 months, where you've got non-public interest cases, and in the last financial year, 87% of these cases were completed in 18 months, because the 18 months is a standard that we set ourselves, and in fact it's in our performance objectives, as we are a public entity, and in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, this is a standard that we measure ourselves and our success against. The international benchmark for the duration of investigations is 36 months for public interest cases. And at the same time, it's important to highlight that we have to adhere to the Promotion of Administration of Justice Act, which means that all parties must have a fair opportunity to defend themselves and to put their case forward. Now, if I can move on to the disciplinary process. This process will start by us briefing the instructing attorneys. Once a decision has been made that it will go to disciplinary hearing, there will be pre-trial preparation with investigators, witnesses, attorneys. The hearing arrangements are set up. The respondent is served with a charge sheet by the sheriff of the court. The respondent is required to plead to the charges. Evidence bundle is prepared and issued, and we must then convene a hearing of the disciplinary committee. Trevor, I can then focus on the two matters that you wanted me to give feedback on specifically, the status of the African Bank investigation and the status of the Linkway trading investigation. The African Bank investigation, we opened the matter in December 2014, and that was initiated internally. There were no complaints at that stage. We had enough information to link possible misconduct and to the auditor, and therefore we opened an investigation internally at the RBA. In May 2016, after we opened the investigation, we obviously proceeded with the investigation. But in May 2016, the Myburgh Commission report was released, and we believed at that point that there will be corroborating evidence in the Myburgh report that would support the RBA's investigation, and therefore we waited for that report to be issued and clearly referred to that report when we continued with our investigation. By June 2016, we then extended our investigation to incorporate the findings in the Myburgh report. In December of that year, draft allegations were tabled at the investigating committee and approved for issuing to the respondent, and they were given till June 2017 to respond. Now, without going into the detail of the extent of the papers that were involved, the Myburgh report alone was over 800 pages. We believe that it was important that we provide the auditor with sufficient time to respond to all these allegations, and the charge sheet was also quite lengthy. In October 2017, this month, we will table at our investigation committee the recommendation to DAC, and of course that recommendation will only be made at the investigation committee. So this month, the investigation committee will make one of 3 recommendations to the disciplinary advisory committee, which will be to dismiss, to enter into a consent order, or to take it to a disciplinary hearing. On the status of the KPMG investigation, again, it was an investigation opened internally on the 30th of June 2017, and at the same time we issued the investigating letters to the respondents. On the 28th of July 2017, we received our initial response from the respondents, and what we're busy with at the moment is reviewing responses and initiating follow-up requests for additional evidence and for additional information. So the investigation is currently underway. On the 27th of September, we met with the KPMG International Chairman-elect at the time. He became Chairman on the 1st of October, Bill Thomas, and the new CEO of the local KPMG office, Shlomo Dlomo, to discuss with them the process of investigation and the fact that we needed them to cooperate with the RBA. On 28 September, on the 27th of September, we also had a special board meeting at the RBA so that the board could instruct the Secretariat on the process forward and discuss the KPMG matter, any possible risks in the market, and what our process should be as the RBA. After the board meeting, we issued another letter to the CEO of KPMG to remind them of the importance of submitting their information for the investigation timeously, and also gave them a list of the information that we still required. Now, what we are doing at the moment, and this is all decisions resulting from the board meeting, and after they've had a thorough discussion on the current investigation and where it should be going, the board instructed that we have to fast-track this particular investigation, and I'm talking now about KPMG because the African Bank will already be in front of the Investigations Committee this month. So we will fast-track the investigation, but we have to respect the prescribed process of the Auditing Profession Act and the disciplinary rules, and of course bear in mind the requirements of the Promotion of Administration of Justice Act. We must also continue to manage the risk of the loss in confidence in the profession, and what we've done in that regard, for example, is if we want to restore that confidence, it's important that we do take appropriate regulatory action against the auditors if it's necessary. It's important that we do get to the right outcome in the investigation, and it's important that we also continuously engage with other bodies. We have been, since we started the investigation, engaged with other international regulators who has a keen interest in the outcome of the KPMG matter in South Africa, because it has now become an international matter, and they have an interest because a lot of the clients of KPMG in South Africa might have branches or companies in other jurisdictions which fall under the regulation of other regulators. We also will continue to enforce cooperation with the IRBA, and if there is no cooperation from the firms, then we will take appropriate action against that audit firm, because it is important that we bring these cases to a close. And therefore, we have got provisions in our legislation that provides us with the power to take action if there is non-cooperation from the clients. These two cases are not very different from other high-profile cases that we're investigating, and we do have a lot of these cases going on at the same time, and we expect the same level of cooperation from the firms and from the auditors when it comes to the current cases. We are focusing our capacity on these high-profile cases at the moment, and we have had support offered from the international regulators to say that should we need capacity, they will assist. But at the moment, we have used our internal capacity to reallocate our resources to these cases. We also met with the Institute of Chartered Accountants to ensure that we understand exactly what their scope is of their investigation, to ensure that we don't duplicate, and to ensure that no confusion is caused in the market, because we need to be careful when it comes to the outcomes of different investigations. And if there's any different outcome, then it might confuse the public. So it's important that we continue to engage with them on what it is that they're doing, or any other investigations, or what their scope is, because we need to ensure that we don't duplicate our efforts. So we have met with SAIJA leadership on Saturday and discussed on our way forward and how we will cooperate with each other, and we will continue to have those meetings during these investigations. I will stop there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mania, Mr. Lees, Floyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think we're all aware that KPMG International claims in their statement that they identified no evidence of illegal behavior or corruption on the part of KPMG partners or staff. Now, we simply do not believe that that statement is credible, precisely because the investigation was conducted evidently by KPMG International, and they are therefore conflicted. That is why we asked for these hearings, so that we could satisfy ourselves that the regulator is conducting an investigation. So thank you for your report. My first question is, in your statement you said that you had interacted with KPMG International and KPMG South Africa, and at some point you had to revert back to them to remind them to submit documents or evidence timeously. That suggests to me that KPMG South Africa are not cooperating or not sufficiently cooperating with your investigation. Is that a correct inference from your statement? So that's the first question. The second question deals with the scope. Now, in your statement on the 30th of June 2017, where you announced that IRBA would conduct an investigation, it appeared to me that the scope of that investigation was limited to the whole question of the audit of Linkway trading, which was central to the so-called Dubai laundromat. But I want to be clear, does the scope of your investigation extend to the controversy surrounding the forensic report into the so-called SARS rogue unit? That's the second question. The third question is, and I'm delighted to hear this, is that you've decided that it's in the public interest to fast-track this investigation and presumably complete the investigation inside the 18-month period. How long do you expect this investigation to take? That's the third question. The fourth question is, assuming that IRBA were to make a negative finding, what is the maximum sanction that IRBA can recommend? The last question is, I mean, it's very clear from your presentation that these investigations are complex, and they are, for that reason, likely to take fairly extended periods of time and consume significant resources. Do you have all the resources at your disposal necessary to complete this investigation and indeed other public interest investigations? And if you do not have the resources, what resources do you require?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm absolutely delighted that the slides have been put 6 on a page rather than 1 on a page. So whoever was responsible for that, I think, it needs congratulations. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to IRBA for your presentation, and so encouraging to see the work and progress that is taking place. I just want to ask about the investigations into SAA, whether you've able to give us any feedback on those. Yeah, again, one understands that the detail can't be given to us, but some comfort about those investigations. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson. You know, when we, I think 2014 and 2015, when we made substantial submissions around financial crimes in South Africa, more so around the illicit financial flows, we pointed to the fact that most of these so-called auditing firms are collaborators in the huge financial crimes that occur in South Africa. They actually legitimate them in many instances. And we actually made a call, actually, as part of our submission to the committees that made submissions to the Davis Tax Committee, to every platform, which say that part of the things that we need to do is to look broadly into the conduct of these auditing firms that legitimate crimes. We have written to IRBA on many occasions. Now, recently, even around the Transnet issue, to say, let's look at the auditors there on legitimating the huge crimes that have occurred there. And I'm interested in knowing as to what are the instances upon which IRBA has ever acted on any of these professional bodies for misconduct. Like, can we give examples if you have ever acted on any of these professional bodies? Because if you have never done that anyway, I think that you are part of the lawlessness. Like, you're part of the fact that there is no law in that area. The auditors can do as they wish, and they legitimate wrongful doings and crime, like huge financial crimes that occur. Who have you ever acted on? What have you done? Have you ever withdrawn the accreditation of any of these professional bodies? Because the Auditing Professions Act, I think in 35C, says that the regulatory body, pending the outcome of a process referred to in the process above, may suspend the accreditation of a professional body if it considers it is in the best interest of the public or the auditing profession. I think that is beyond doubt now that the misconduct of KPMG requires the application of Section 35C, that you should terminate the accreditation of KPMG because it's in the interest of the public. Like, there is a necessary and solid outcry on the misconduct of these accomplices of criminal activities by KPMG. And of course that there will be a lot of issues that will be raised, which are always raised to delay enforcement of laws that is still under investigations. But I think that there's prima facie and adequate evidence that IRBA must put into effect Section 35C of the Auditing Professions Act, so that we protect the auditing profession. That is your obligation in terms of the legislation, but also to protect the integrity of our country. That it cannot be that the lawlessness that applies to the National Prosecutions Authority, the lawlessness that applies to the political party that is ruling the country today, must now extend to every sector of society. It cannot be. Someone has to take action in terms of some of these developments that are prevailing. So let's deal with that. Can you give us examples of the instances that you have acted before and whether we should not look into a stricter application of Section 35C of the APA in this instance. Because if we tiptoe around KPMG, then you must know that it's the end of it. It's the complete end of it, that the institutions that are supposed to verify integrity of companies and government and all entities are the ones that are accomplices of crime. We cannot allow that to be the case, because we might as well dissolve this country and live as an, or dissolve government and everything as and live as an when we wish and without not doing anything. So it's one of the things that we have to do.
Your other points up till now,
So,
I mean, really.
So those are some of the things that we have to look. Thank you, Chairperson. It's a cogent submission.
That's what you say. It's not for you to decide whether it's good. I think I'm brilliant, you know. Who cares? I mean, when I'm 5 years old, my son might say that, but when he's 15 and he says that, I say, hey, boy, it's not for you to say it. Right, okay, Mr. Lees.
Mr. Chairman, it goes without saying that I am brilliant, but we won't put that to the vote here today, as I might just find myself rather disappointed. Mr. Chairman, I just, asked questions, and perhaps the RBA aren't fully briefed about what exactly, but I'm really concerned about the audit, last year's annual report of SAA, where the auditors accepted that they were a going concern when quite clearly they weren't. And so I had asked RBA to investigate whether, in fact, there was any delinquency on the part of the auditors, PwC and others, in accepting the going concern assumption, because it seemed clear to me and to many others that SAA, even at that point in September last year or August last year, was not a going concern, and quite clearly the history has proven that to be the case, but obviously one can't look at history to assess whether the assumption was correct or not. So, and there might be another issue with the auditors of SAA as well that wasn't raised by me.
Anybody else wants to ask? Welcome, Charles de Beer, our wonderful chairperson from the NCOP side. I know Floyd won't agree, but nevertheless, I think that about you.
So what is the basis of the NCOP participating? I don't want to disagree. I want to be told what is the basis of the NCOP participating in this process.
No, the way it works, Floyd, you know, you're the rules committee guy. He comes to observe, and obviously the norm has been, whatever the rule is, if there are people, at least in this committee, right, we're cool about it. We allow everybody to speak, right? Never mind that people attack us for being autocratic and neo-Stalinist. They don't use that word. But this is the only committee I know anywhere in the world where up till the day before you vote on a bill, you have a right of say. Now, there are people in the ANC who don't approve of it. Well, tough, because the majority in the study groups agreed to that. Similarly, I mean, Floyd, if the NCOP is here, it's good. He's taking his time. He's got his own responsibility. There are 5 committees clustered in one. Floyd, don't make it life difficult. If he wants to speak, it's fine. No one stopped him until now, not even you, by the way. But he's here more to observe. It's not the NCOP committee. He's coming because he's interested in the issue. Now, can I raise a few quick things? One is, firstly, Bernard, you want to introduce your team to us, right? I must inform the committee, there was only yesterday morning that I spoke to Bernard and said we would prefer a board member to be here, and he said it's pretty tough at this late hour to bring a board member, but I think it'll be more consistent with our approach, and I said to him, I'll take responsibility. Can I also raise something I want to raise when we look at the program about the role of a committee chair during constituency stroke party political time? And I'm raising this with the authorities in Parliament about how much of time are we supposed to spend as chairs sitting here doing parliamentary work. For example, yesterday I left Parliament at 8:15 in the evening when it's a constituency day. All of it spent, except for the first hour with the ICT guy, on work of this committee. I think this committee is split into 2. That's my view. It should have a legislative arm and an oversight arm. But that's the later when you look at the program tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, I can imagine what will happen. But in any case, can we look at the issues? The first is it possible that when you finish this process, right, you might want to propose amendments to the law, right? Is that a possibility? Secondly, I do want to agree with Floyd. Of course, Floyd, you know, is trying to make a point, me sort of thing. We did this. He's right. He raised it first. But it is correct what he says, that he had raised it very much at the outset that, look, these four companies, the big four, are complicit in this. All right, fine. Well, you are, by the way, have no speaking rights. Peace was here 6 minutes late. You are here 35 minutes late. So, by the way, members need to know we're sitting here till 5:30 p.m. with a half-an-hour break. And then comrades from the study group need to know we're here till 7:30 p.m. Right, having said that, can we just raise a few quick things? One is the legislative amendment. Secondly, I think, you know, Floyd, to be fair to you, it's on our agenda. But we've been focusing primarily on what action are the police going to take. That was a shift from all the committee chairs. We said, look, we can discuss till the cows come home, as it were. If the police and the NP are not acting against these people, it's really just an abstract. But what I think, Floyd, we should do, now, can you please note this, Teboho? We should, the next time we sit on illicit financial flows, I think we should invite the companies. I think he's right. We did agree on it, but it's just not been able to slide in. So, you know, I want to agree with everything he says apart from the last third, right? The surrealistic stuff, the Bakunin-type anarchism, you know, that's what we're going to evolve into. Or on the other hand, Somalia. I don't know which he was referring to. But anyway, I don't agree with that. But for the rest, he was absolutely right in everything he said. About you, IRBA, I think he's being very tough, but he's got the right to say it. And you are under scrutiny now. And he's right. What have you done until now? But I don't agree with the tone and timbre of his language, nor the severity of what he says. But I think he's right to ask the question that, you know, if all these things are happening, not least illicit financial flows, and we are one of the top 10 countries, and then we must thank the EFF. They put this issue vigorously on the agenda, actually. Even if I was debating with Floyd on the eve of 2019, would desperately trying to get every 0.25% of a vote, I'll admit to that, because it's a fact. You raised it first. Now, on the issue of your investigations, right, have you been under any pressure by anybody, either to do these investigations beyond what any individual can do, which is required, or to stop them? And if so, well, we want to know what the board is doing about it, and the minister, and do you want Parliament to do anything about it, if it's necessary? Then on the SAIJA thing, now here, colleagues and comrades, it's just my personal view, Thandi. I don't know, right? So I'm throwing it out. Now, while cooking on 2 consecutive evenings, I had the TV on. So, you know, between banging the pots and all that, I cook all the time, as you well know. So, you know, I didn't quite hear what was going on. On the one day, I got the sense that Bernard was extremely irate at SAIJA, right? That they're having this investigation. I had the tone more than the content, right? So I must accept that maybe I got it wrong. But I had visitors, and they were my priority. I'm human too, you know, unlike what some people think here. I'm supposed to be on call 25 hours a day, 8 days a week. But that's fine. Now then, the next day, I see something or hear something. Again, I'm cooking, and it's old Nombembe, one of my heroes, right? Saying, well, you know, this is what we're doing. So the question I want to put to you, you know, my own view, Thandi, is the more investigations, the merrier, except they should not undermine each other. So the first thing, my view, Frank might help, is you are the legally mandated body to investigate, and you should do that. Now, SAIJA is also a professional body of auditors, right? So is there no way, you said you met, is there no way both of you can meet and they acknowledge that you are the primary organization, and the outcomes that you come to are some things that Parliament and the Minister and the Executive have to apply their mind to primarily? So that they do their work, you just define your respective areas of work, it's complementary, and then what they do is, I don't know if you can do this, Frank, this is an idea, that what happens then is you finish your report, right? So when you finish your report, when they do their report, they also take into account of what you said. So you don't end up with a situation where you find KPMG guilty, say, of all the crimes they're accused of, and then those guys clear them. Then you're going to get confusion in the public mind. Then I see KPMG is doing an inquiry. The police, presumably, they tell us, are doing some inquiry, the Hawks and so on. Now, those are not things we can manage here. Our chairperson, I must remind him, has to follow up on all those issues, Björkman. So what I'm saying is, in respect of SAIJA and yourselves, can't you strike a deal? Can't you do it in a way that they can come to their own independent opinions, but they must take into account what you've done, and so on and so on, that sort of thing. So I don't think we should oppose SAIJA. We should say, fine, but strike a deal. If you feel the need, and hopefully you don't need that because we don't want to interfere, maybe we can have a small committee here that assists, multi-party, right? That says, guys, do your respective stuff, and this is it. Now, over to you, Thandi.
I need to apologize. Really, I wanted to be early on this one, and you'll know because why I would have wanted to, because I felt vindicated in a way on what I said earlier on about why there was a need of mandatory rotation, because I raised an issue and SAIJA did not take it into consideration, and now today I feel vindicated by that, but I don't want to go into town about that. The most important approach, that will be the best approach for us to come to the bottom of this matter. And let's not even look at KPMG as an institution and look at the principle of defaulting by audit firms, because to me it's more about the principle than who defaulted. We should use KPMG's behavior as an example to have ways and means to ensure that there's no loopholes in the system. Now, IRBA, it's our legal authority in this context, and there mustn't be an element of diminishing returns in terms of it's taking its rightful posture to do thorough investigations. We will welcome any other contribution made by firms, but firms themselves and organizations will be conflicted because it's their membership, right? So here's an independent body that carries the responsibility. So much as we want to welcome SAIJA's role, the buck stops with IRBA. So we might want to look at all reports, it's not a problem, and we are not preemptive of the outcomes, because we need to allow process of investigations to be thorough, because I don't want us to be emotive about it and play to the gallery, and just because it's a matter that is there in the public discourse, and we start to take a posture before we even look at the merits and the demerits of the case itself. But to us, it's another litmus test and a lesson, given the defaulting of the banks and now the defaulting of presumably, I need to be very careful of the language I use. At least I'm misconstrued to mean that I'm conclusive in the approach. But I want us to strengthen the role of IRBA in this case, that any other investigation must be a feeder into the work of IRBA. So it shouldn't just be a standalone, because one can ask us, which report will the committee consider? So ours is IRBA. So, but doesn't therefore suggest that we will not take into account. So I want us to be clear on that specific one, but also not to diminish the message that we did say it up front, that there's a human element in the operations of any institutions, and it was ignored. And when African Bank fails, it was a human element. So nobody who's human cannot do that. But also, it says who police the policemen in this case. And that's where everything lies. Who police the policemen? IRBA is the rightful organization to do that. It will give us scientific proof because they carry the necessary expertise to do that type of work on our behalf, and then we'll take it from there. But the sooner we come to the end of it, the better, because it's a matter of national interest as we speak. So it means we will have to speed up the process of investigation so that it's not a delayed process. because there are other parties who are affected who will want to look at KPMG and others with a particular eye. So if we move with speed and we bring the matter to closure, then it will be easy. On a lighter note, it was the ANC who took up this thing. It was not the DA, it was not everybody else. Thank you very much, Chair.
Everybody will claim it doesn't really matter, man. We're here as a committee. Now, all right, now it's time for you to reply, is that right? Okay. JSC here, and we're running right through till 13:30, so we'd like to tie up, because this is part of an ongoing engagement. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. So again, apologies from the board members. I did give the chairman feedback last night saying that we tried to call all the board members yesterday, but they couldn't make it. Otherwise, the chairman of the board and the board members would have accompanied me. On my right, I've got Herman Tlaku. He is the technical manager in the CEO's office at the RBA, so he does all my research, and he supports me with technical matters and just in general, even on my international committees. And on my left, I have Lorraine van Skalkwyk, who's responsible for the strategic projects in our office. And you'd have seen her here with mandatory audit firm rotation, and with KPMG, you'll also hear more about her. So, Chair, if I can, in the next 10 minutes, try to respond to all the questions. Honourable Mainir has asked, firstly, about cooperation from KPMG. And I did mention that we, after our discussion and our meetings with KPMG, we had to remind them of the cooperation, because in the beginning, we did not always receive the information that we required. It was important that the process isn't delayed, or that we are fed the information in bits and pieces. For our investigation, it's important that we receive everything on time, because it impacts directly on our investigation. After we have met with the leadership, the local leadership and the international leadership, they have given us the commitment that they will cooperate, that they will supply us with all the information. And since then, they have been giving us the necessary information, bar one or two documents that we might require from them, of which, again, we follow up immediately, because we don't want them to think that there's an opportunity to not give us information or to delay giving us information. With regards to the scope of the investigation, clearly in our statement on 30 June, we did say that we are investigating Linkway Trading, the auditors of Linkway Trading, and we are investigating the auditors that attended the Gupta wedding. However, we do have the right, if we come across information that might indicate that we need to indicate more auditors at KPMG, or more audits or companies that might come to light during our investigation, we can extend our investigation to other persons, going beyond the persons that have already been mentioned in the press. We could extend our investigation. In respect of the SARS Rogue Unit report, that was one of the examples where the first step that we had to do was to find out who actually issued and who signed off on that report. It was a forensic report, and at the time that the report first came into the public media, I had a meeting with KPMG so that we could discuss exactly what the report was. If it was a report that fell into our jurisdiction, we would have started an investigation immediately, but at that point we realized that it was a forensic report. Now, when it's a forensic report, it means that it's not something that falls into our jurisdiction unless the report was signed off by a registered auditor. What we have determined in the meantime is that the report was in fact signed off by a registered auditor, which means that it could come into our jurisdiction to investigate. Now, there again, to be clear, we will investigate the conduct of the auditor, whether the auditor exercised due care, whether the auditor was not negligent, whether the auditor complied with any applicable standards, etc. That is what we will be investigating when it comes to the SARS Rogue Unit report. The Honourable Mainir then asked about our timing. I tried to explain the process, and I think Honourable Mainir also referred to the fact that we understand that these are complex issues. Our investigation could be extended beyond Linkway Trading, so it's very difficult to give an exact date that we will complete the investigation, other than for me to say what I've said earlier, because it is in the public interest, the linkway trading investigation on its own, we would like to complete that as soon as possible. And even though some other information might come to our attention that will extend our investigation to other auditors and to other companies involved, we will try our best to get the linkway trading investigation done as soon as possible. It's just difficult to give an exact date of that. The maximum sanction that the RBA can issue is to take away the license of an individual auditor. We have not taken away the license of a firm so far. We haven't had the need to, but when in our Act, when it refers to an auditor, it refers to the individual and the audit firm. But so far we have only taken away the licenses of an individual auditor, and that is the maximum sanction that we can give, the disciplinary committee can issue. One of the things...
You can't refer such a case to the police for prosecution, investigation and then prosecution. There may not be anything in the law, but what stops you from doing that? If you found the person guilty, in the linkway case, for example, I mean, that's public money. That's the allegation. I don't know if it's true or not yet, but if it's public money, we can't have that. The person has to go to court. Are you able to do that?
Chair, we normally go back to the Constitution, which makes it clear that public entities in our position can cooperate with other bodies and refer matters to them. So in terms of our Constitution, we will be able to make that link. Yeah.
Whoever it is, if they're doing wrong and they've done this thing, they must be referred to the police. And they must be, there's nothing to talk about. Frank, is there anything to talk about here? Frank, can we instruct them, not to tell them that we expect them to do that?
Chair, they...
No, I'm saying if people are guilty, I was very clear, I have no evidence. If people are guilty, wherever they are, in whatever situation, auditors, I mean, the penalty that I withdraw your license. I would be happy to have my license withdrawn if I've got billions and billions of money put away somewhere. So, hey, this is not right. Frank, is there anything wrong with us saying to them that we strongly recommend that if anybody on any issue they're investigating is guilty or are guilty, whatever the word is, Frank, they must be acted upon in terms of the criminal justice system. Can we say that?
Of course, Chair. No,
Good.
of course.
Now, in the way I've formulated it, anybody got any problem? No. Let's move on. Now, Tanti, don't complicate life. I said if on any matter, not linkway necessarily. What's the other one we're looking at? SAA. The other one we're looking at is, what's it? Not we, you are. Yeah, every African bank, yes.
Chair, I will want everybody to go to jail, you know, that's easy for me. But I'm just being procedural. I want them to investigate, bring the report, and then we make the recommendation. You can't make the recommendations before they bring the report. Yeah, I know you are. Yeah,
people must know.
It's okay to be warm.
Yeah.
It's okay to warm up.
Don't get so liberalistic here. Otherwise, we'll take you
No,
to the,
I said to you, I would want people to go to jail.
Yeah,
you know,
fine.
so
Fine.
I can.
We're
be
not
more
saying
harsh.
anything about any
But
specific case.
I'm just being procedural. Let's not be found wanting in terms of procedure.
Okay, those of you who are English-speaking journalists here, the non-English-speaking journalists, they get it all right. Can I indicate that I said if in any matter before the IRBA where people are found guilty of offenses, it seems to this committee that withdrawal of the license is not enough, and we would urge IRBA to consider. We want to instruct you, urge IRBA to consider in any matter before you that they proceed in referring the matter for investigation into the SAPS for possible prosecution by the NPA, and good luck with that. But there you are.
Thank you, Chair. Your recommendation has duly been noted. The question, again on the maximum sanction, the Chairman asked us earlier whether there's any areas in our legislation or law that needs to be changed and whether the Parliament can help. That is certainly an amendment that we're bringing to Parliament, and we'd ask Parliament to please support the maximum fines that we can issue, because at the moment it is limited by the Adjustment of Fines Act. It is because it's linked to that, it's an extremely low monetary fine that we can issue. The number is 250,000 rand per charge, and we will come back to this committee to ask for amendments to our legislation. Thank you for raising that. Chair, on the
Brought here. The bill is brought here that morning. We'll pass it that very day. Thandi, what do you want to insist on saying?
No, Chair, you see, he catch my point. I wanted to say let the recommendation on the changes of the Act come before the finishing of this case, so that in an event that is going to affect the outcomes, we are able to make that the enactment beforehand. Because, for instance, if KPMG is found guilty, the new proposal should kick in, because it's not going to be worth it if you are going to fine them 250,000, because there will be no stipulation in the law that takes your recommendation of taking them further. So can it come first? That's why I'm saying let's be very procedural, because it will be helpful. So can we move with speed to bring that? We change the Act as quick as we can, and then if it needs to apply, then it applies. Thanks.
Tell us retrospectively, since the case has started, you can't apply the new Act. Is that right? When are you people? Where's the people here? Journalists, can you write about this, Linda? How long you know me? I require a PhD in law. I have been a very good lawyer. I often interpret Frank Jenkins and the law people. Right? Okay, move over then to the next answer, please.
Just on the resources, we have, as I mentioned, reallocated our investigators to the high cases, and we are ensuring that we are getting, if necessary, support from other international regulators. But the point is that we shouldn't be getting resources. We'll manage and we'll cope, but we shouldn't be getting resources from other regulators, and we might have to ask for more resources from Parliament. To come to Honourable Lisa's questions on South African Airways, indeed we got the complaint from the DA regarding inadequate going concern disclosure in the financial statements. The complaint was received on the 18th of October 2016, and we issued our initial letter to the respondents, who are the auditors, on the 19th of October 2016. That matter is now ready to go to the Investigations Committee at their October meeting. That was the plan, that was the schedule. So if everything is still according to plan, then it should be on the agenda for the October meeting as well. I haven't confirmed in the last couple of days whether that is still going to happen, because the meeting is coming up soon. In response to Honourable Shavambo's concern around illicit financial flows, which we have noted during our meetings and our attendance at these meetings, and I don't want to be accused of being dramatic about these matters, but I can only say that I fully support the concern that we cannot allow these irregularities to happen, and that anybody that is complicit in these irregularities, we should take action against them. I just want to then focus a little bit on the jurisdiction of the RBA, again reminding the members that the RBA cannot really investigate illicit financial flows because that is not in our mandate, but certainly if auditors should have picked up that there are illicit financial flows, if they have developed they should develop procedures to pick up whether there is, and if they have done something which is not in terms of our standards and the responsibility to look for these, then we can take action against the auditor, certainly. But our jurisdiction would be limited to whether auditors picked it up in terms of the standards or the code of ethics. Just on the accreditation and the professional bodies, can I just distinguish between can I explain the difference between the accreditation and the licensing of an auditor? The accreditation in our Act refers to the accreditation of a professional body, and in this case we have only accredited one professional body, which is SAIJA. Right? So there are certain institutional and program requirements to remain accredited, and we look at things such as whether SAIJA does take disciplinary action against their members, and I'll come back to that when we talk about cooperation with them. So that is separate. The accreditation of the professional body of which auditors are members is separate to the licensing of the auditor. So while we accredit SAIJA, we give a license to the auditor, and I think what Honourable Shavambo was referring to was whether we should be withdrawing the license of the auditor and not the accreditation of the professional body, because the audit firm is not a professional body itself. The question around how often we've withdrawn licenses, I apologize that I don't have that information at my fingertips, but we can certainly come back to the committee and indicate whether we've, how often we've done that before. Something that we also just maybe again raise with the committee is what the RBA has been concerned about for a while, which is in response to the World Bank report that recommended that we don't only regulate auditors. And I think what we've seen quite often in the last couple of instances is that it's not only the auditors that might be guilty of not complying or with our regulations, that there are various other parties involved, including accountants, CFOs, financial directors. And what the World Bank has recommended is that all those other parties should also be regulated. At the moment, only auditors are regulated. And we will again come back to this committee to support us on comprehensive regulation. We've made proposals to the Minister, and hopefully we can pick that up again. The chairman then asked about changes to laws. Absolutely. In fact, we had a slide on what we'd like you to support us on. We took it out because we didn't want to take up too much time on that. But yes, one of the changes will not only be on the sanctions, but also the powers to obtain information. At the moment, we don't have powers to subpoena, for example, in our Act. But we want to ask the committee to assist us in obtaining those powers. So we will come back to the committee. The question on whether we've had pressure by anyone to continue or stop the investigation, the answer is at this stage, no. We haven't, that hasn't happened yet. And I'm happy to inform the committee should that happen. On the question of SAIJA and whether we can work together, I think Honourable Tobias quite rightly mentioned the difference between our investigation and any other investigation by a member body or by the audit firm themselves, is that when you have the firm commissioning an investigation or the institute, which is a member body, they act on behalf of their members, then we have to be careful about the independence. We're not saying that it won't be a good report, and I fully agree that the committee and everybody should take into account whatever reports they can. But bear in mind that the independence might be slightly different to our report, and therefore it's difficult for us. We've had many suggestions that we do a joint investigation. It's difficult for the RBA to remain independent and have an independent report if we join investigation. So we will most likely remain independent, but continue to engage with the other bodies doing investigations so that we can see if there's any overlap. I also I like the idea of the RBA being the primary investigator, because that is what we were appointed for. And in terms of the bylaws of the Institute, that is exactly what it says. It says that they will wait for an RBA investigation before they proceed with their own. And the confusion in the past, when you've heard me on the radio, was because we weren't quite sure what it is that they were going to do. But now we are busy resolving that, and we will ensure that we work together so that we can get to the big matter, which is KPMG. In response to Honourable Tobias's comments, I think I agree with all of those. Again, the fact that we must ensure that there's no diminishing returns. While we will try and fast-track the investigation, we must also respect the process so that we can not be challenged on the process. And when our outcome, as I mentioned earlier, to restore confidence in our profession, our outcome must be credible, and therefore our process must be believable. Any other investigation should be a feeder into RBA. We'd really appreciate that. And the last comment that Honourable Tobias made was the RBA being the police of the polices. Again, we understand the role of auditors in society, and if that trust is broken, if the public doesn't have the trust in auditors themselves, then we definitely have to do something about it as the RBA and ensure that we can create that confidence in the public again. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, colleagues, that we round this up because we're running out of time. And also, there's not much more we can do now. What we can do is call IRBA back again in the next quarter. But we will take quick questions now. Shall we all agree on 2 minutes each? Right. Right, 2 minutes. All of us are abiding by 2 minutes. Right, you had your hand up. Who's next? Right. Okay, and it's you. Okay, then it's fine. Okay, 2 minutes, please. And can we just abide by 2 minutes?
Chair, I just want to come back to my first question. The KPMG South Africa sets themselves a standard in their statement where they say KPMG South Africa will fully cooperate with IRBA to assist in its investigation. The standard there being fully cooperate. But what we now hear is that, in fact, they have not fully cooperated with IRBA. They have failed to provide you with information when it was required. They have provided information in bits and pieces. And although levels of cooperation seem to have improved, they have cooperated, bar, in your words, 1 or 2 documents. It seems to me that KPMG South Africa have failed to meet their own standard, which is to fully cooperate with IRBA. So my question is, would you agree that KPMG South Africa have not fully cooperated with IRBA? Yes or no? And can I suggest, Chair, if the answer is no, and I can't see how the answer could be anything other than no, that this committee consider writing to KPMG South Africa, asking them to explain why it is that they've failed to cooperate, and what action they are taking to ensure that they do cooperate with the regulator. Thank you.
Chair, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask questions. I'm going to make 2 recommendations. The first one is in relation to the element of conduct authority that IRBA has, to strengthen it, that in the legislation that's going to come, there must be clear stipulation on how conduct is going to be regulated, not only for the accountants, but the entire staff of an audit firm, so that it's clear in the legislation, so that when we say an individual has breached the prescripts of the law, then we explain it's what type of conduct. Because, for instance, I want to make an example. I took it for granted that if you are an accountant or you are an authority, you can't be invited to private activities of companies that you're doing business with. I took it for granted. Some take it as a moral issue, but I thought in terms of a business principle, you'll be conflicted if you do that. And for instance, I used to refuse to attend dinners offered by government departments when we're going to oversee their work, because morally, it might not be a written language, but you'll tend to be very nice to them after you've eaten something that they offered you on the plate, you know. I'm speaking for myself, Chair, but I'm saying, Chair, I was making an example. I'm saying in terms of regulation of conduct, there must be clear principles that are put. I'm making a recommendation so that nobody's found wanting. 2, I also want to suggest there must be an element of training of individuals to understand the do's and the don'ts, so that we take it forward, that 10 years to come, we shouldn't be talking about these issues. We should have perfected the system in such a way that nobody should really embarrass us the way we've been embarrassed in the current conjunctures. Thank you.
Get some clarity very quickly, within 2 minutes, right? If I understand you correctly, you're saying because the report on the intelligence unit, right, of SARS is actually a forensic report, it falls outside your mandate. However, you've established that an auditor is responsible for the report, and therefore it's something that you will consider pursuing. That's correct, okay. And, oh, you wanted to say something, sorry, yes. Okay, I'm done. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that distinction of what is in Section 35 and Section 51, because Section 51 speaks to the sanctions that can be imposed on the auditors, like after a hearing, that you have an option to could give a caution or impose a fine, but you have an option as well to suspend or even cancel the auditors like that have been registered. I think that is one thing that we should emphasize and focus on, that at the end of this, there mustn't be a slap on the wrist of KPMG, like, so that we send a very strong message that lawlessness will not be permitted. So there must be a clear message that is sent in that regard. And I don't think that there should be any suggested cooperation, Chair, with SAIJA. SAIJA, if SAIJA wants to conduct its own process, let it do it, but we must not give an instruction to IRBA to cooperate with SAIJA in terms of this particular process. Like, SAIJA, it's for the auditors, like, they possibly would want to protect the status quo, like they want to protect their members and everything else there. Like, you could even hear how they sounded when they came to make submissions on the mandatory audit firm rotation, that they are happy with the status quo, and we cannot as Parliament give an instruction or indication that in this particular process that needs decisive action, there should be a cooperation. I think IRBA is legislatively mandated to deal with this issue independently. And that is what we should emphasize, that it should be handled by IRBA. What we will need commitment on are the time frames as to when is this going to be concluded, so that a clear message is sent and there's no confusion in terms of what should happen. But I think also those who are, I know that there are people in KPMG who say that we're not the only ones who are part of these scandals. All the auditing firms are involved. Let them come out with all the information. If it means that all the four are subjected to a process, let them be subjected to a process, and all wrongdoing is uprooted decisively.
Basically, can you reply on that matter of SAIJA? Firstly, they have a right to do an investigation. We note Floyd's point of view, but I don't think that's a majority view unless we're going to change our view. So we note what you're saying, Floyd, but as a majority, I don't think we're agreeing with him. So you just go ahead and do what we suggested. Secondly,
but Chair, but the point that I'm making, I'm supporting what Honorable Tobias said, that there is no need of us to mandate a cooperation between IRBA and SAIJA. And you are the only one who said that.
All right, so then fine. If I'm the only one, I would...
Yeah, please, please.
Basically, they are doing... Just be careful.
Legally, the buck stops with IRBA, so we shouldn't be confused about it.
No.
So that we give unnecessary mandates.
No,
we can't
are not giving any... Can I
other...
clarify what we are saying? SAIJA is doing an investigation anyway. That investigation could actually, it might finish before, if you listen to what IRBA is saying, before the IRBA investigation. It will cause confusion. We are not mandating them, we are suggesting, proposing, that they consider cooperating with SAIJA to ensure that SAIJA doesn't undermine their legitimate. No one, Tandi, you came late, no one said that the IRBA, I even said, as the chair, please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. It's a fact that I said the following one, and I'm going to summarize very quickly, then put it to the majority. If you don't agree with me, so what? It's fine. So this is what I'm suggesting. One, SAIJA is doing an investigation anyway. Two, their investigation may well, because they're not as rigorous as you are, and mandated as you are in terms of law to abide by your very rigorous, onerous process, which could take up to 18 months, they could well finish beforehand. And SAIJA is respected, whatever we may think about them. They might conclude beforehand something that's completely different from what your outcome may be as IRBA. Three, you've already had a meeting with them, I gather, from what you've said. And therefore, it seems to me you're already edging towards some sort of complementarity. All I suggested was, in that case, what you could strike an understanding with them around is that part of their work will involve responding to your outcomes and will come after your outcomes. Now, if there's no agreement on that by the majority, so be it. I'm cool. I've done my job. That is my proposal. She's right. There's no mandated position from the study group. Now, on that matter, let's not have a discussion. What is the majority view? Floyd may be right, that we don't want to do that sort of thing. Makes no sense to me, but who am I to say? I'm just one individual. Yes, Thandi.
Chair, I'm not shooting down anybody's suggestion, and that's why I said lists were misconstrued. You see, we're making, as an institution of the law, we're making a legal recommendation, right? It can, Chair, I beg for your indulgence. You see, when we make a recommendation, it must not be open-ended. It must not be misconstrued. That's why I used the words, SAIJA's report can act as a feeder. And I use the word feeder in particular to show that we're not saying, hell no, nobody must work together. Because once you give an instruction that two organizations with two different mandates and interests, points of interest, should work together, you can be taken to task in a court of law, Chair. Because you see, SAIJA represents the audit firms. IRBA is an independent body. So SAIJA is not independent. It's representing the interests of its members. They belong to it. Now, the role that SAIJA plays and the role that IRBA plays are two different responsibilities also. So we're together.
I withdraw.
No, we're together,
Can
Chair.
we move on? No, I'm ruling. Because really, I withdraw. I merely made a proposal. It's not legally binding on you. I withdraw, right? Let's move on.
Let's say thank you for withdrawing that.
Yeah, but I want to make something clear. There's nothing legally binding. I simply said consider it, but fine, go ahead and the committee doesn't agree. Right, the next quick issue is...
Chair, no, Chair, don't do this. Don't
because
be,
we're running out of time.
Don't be sidelined by Floyd. It's harsh words.
I've done my job.
No. You see, Floyd was able to win. What you make Floyd to win? I'm saying.
No, I don't care if Floyd wins. Whoever.
You see, cooperation. It's the correct word, but it's not a legal instruction.
So we agree. Floyd, don't complicate life. Floyd is piggybacking on you. Floyd, I am now...
SAIJA is funded by these audit
Yeah,
firms,
we agree with all of that. You can't stop
how do you say that an organization that is funded by KPMG should cooperate in the investigation of KPMG? It's
They're
not
doing
sensible.
it anyway. All right. Can we soften it
So-
and start?
so
Okay, Floyd, here's a compromise.
That suggestion
Let's start
must
with point
fall.
one. Okay, point one. IRBA is the legally mandated body to investigate. We will consider primarily their report and no other report before we consider IRBA's report. Point two, we note that there is this thing. Point three, the SAIJA one. We are concerned that the SAIJA investigation and report might precede the IRBA report and might in fact undermine it and therefore cause confusion. Four, in view of this, and in view of a meeting that has taken place already, the committee feels, let's make it feels, not legally binding, feels that consideration should be given to exploring the possibilities of, very loose, very qualified, exploring the possibilities of possibly working together, bearing in mind that IRBA is the primary body. How about that? That's a soft version. Is there any problem with that one? No, that is it. No legally binding thing. If you want to ignore us, ignore us. Let's move on. The second issue I want to draw your attention to, Mr. IRBA, or IRBA team. We've got a request, which we'll look at tomorrow at 2 o'clock, that we must now, look at this whole so-called rogue intelligence unit, this committee, which doesn't have the, and so on. So we have referred the matter to the Intelligence Committee, to the Speaker's office, and to the lawyer. But one of the issues that I want to be absolutely clear about, are you saying you will in fact investigate the auditing side of the issue of the forensic report? Or are you still considering it? And when will we know? Because that will shape the outcome of proposals that will emerge from this committee on whether we have a role, and if so, what in this regard. The latest spat between the Commissioner of SARS and the, KPMG. Now, in that regard, when will you know whether you're going to pursue the auditing side of the forensic report?
Thank you, Chair. So before I respond to the other question, let me respond to that one. We will, have to take a decision on whether we investigate the conduct of the registered auditor. So when it comes to specifics like the spat between the words that you've used, we won't get involved with those kind of matters, but we will investigate the conduct. That, yes, the registered auditor's role in it. And we, as I said earlier, we'll investigate the conduct in terms of our code of ethics, for example. When we will know for sure, again, it shouldn't take us long to know because we already know that the individual is registered with us. So we probably know already that we will be. I just don't know what the extent of the investigation will be.
Linda's up to, but she's putting her hand up, which is not, she's not a speaker. What?
But Chair, that
No,
is out
that's
of
not
order.
a fair. Yeah, that's
That
out
is-
of
that is
order. That's
completely
out of order.
order.
I mean, Linda, how
It's
dare you?
completely out
You
of
know this
order.
thing. I want to tell you something. You, from the EFF, should be most sympathetic to a popular organ of power, right? The people. Never mind that you talk about lawlessness, but you don't observe it in the House. That's another debate we can have, right?
No, but that is
the
out of
fact
order.
is, but the fact is, this thing goes very far. I mean, the other day we had an absurd thing, right, which I haven't followed up on. Absurd thing. I've never heard of that, right, after a committee voted on a report. Now we got a journalist asking a question via the committee. This is utterly absurd, Linda, with the greatest of, you know, I love you very much. And I mean in a platonic sense before they misunderstand, but you're out of order. Right, Thandi, and can we please tie up?
Yeah, Chair, your question actually reminded me of something that I wanted to raise in relation, because you see, IRBA says that in actual fact, the impression was created that it was a forensic report, but then it was signed off by auditors. That in itself, and I'm not giving a scope, at least I misconstrued to be giving a scope for your investigations. We need to come to the bottom of actually why should a forensic report get signed off by an auditor, because there's different skills and different purposes between what an auditor can do and a forensic expert can do. Oh, you see, when you like my points, they are good, Chair. Please listen. Chair, I'm helping. I'm building up on your point. You see, because that's where the gist of the matter is, and least we're doing interference. We're just highlighting issues that might be of interest to us when it comes back, because it will come to the bottom of whether indeed KPMG did its investigation properly and followed the procedures, and it will make us to make a recommendation. And this gets into also the issues on how you're going to penalize individual auditors involved. And I'm saying I'm not giving a scope, but those are it's a highlight of the issues that will come to the bottom of as and when it's our purview to intervene and make. So let's flag them, including our secretaries, to flag them, because it's the issues of highlight that needs to be attended to. Thanks, Chair.
Since yesterday morning, yeah. Okay, can we conclude now? Thank you very much, Mr. Gallis and your team. We will, sorry, you want to say something? Oh, okay. He wants a simple yes or no answer, soundbite. You don't have to give him a simple yes or no answer. It's your right to reply the way you want.
Chair, thank you. I want to reply to the question and then maybe 2 minutes to the comments that were made. Okay. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the way that Honourable Mainira described the question and posed the question, the answer is no. Whether they have fully cooperated.
They haven't fully cooperated.
The answer
Okay,
is no,
fine.
they haven't fully
Then we have the
cooperated.
committee to decide on your second proposal.
On the, I've taken the recommendations from Honourable Tobias regarding the conduct. If we come with amendments to our Act, that we should be clear on the conduct of all employees. And again, must support the comment of referring to the importance of independence. And in this case, the independence of auditors. 2 points were made on independence this morning. The one was on the independence of auditors, and the other one was on the independence of the RBA. And the RBA will fiercely protect its own independence. And the question on who investigates and whether we investigate jointly, we will consider our independence at all times. And in terms of our independence pillar, it goes both ways. Strengthening independence of auditors, and what we've been doing in the last few years on mandatory audit from rotation was exactly that. So I'm glad to hear that Honourable Tobias is remembering that. And also the independence of the RBA is the second part of our pillar. We will also always protect fiercely our independence. And I think Honourable Shavamba made that point as well, so thank you for that. In terms of your question, Chairman, you asked about our scope, and I think I can confirm that the way you've described it was correct, and we did discuss it afterwards. We will investigate whether we can investigate the auditor, but it shouldn't take us long because we know. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Mania proposes that the answer is no, they're not cooperating, we should write a letter. I agree with that, but I want to raise something about fair play. Even if a person, there's a wonderful anecdote I got, but today we too rushed, right? Remind me one to tell about Mozambique, just after the revolutionary struggle triumphed there, and about judges and prosecutors and accused under a Marxist regime. But there isn't the time for that. Now, here it is. Even if a person you know has committed, let's say, 6 murders, and he or she admits to it, usually it's a he, they still have a right of reply. Now, the problem I have, Mr. Mania, with this is this. Maybe we should tweak that letter. KPMG is not here to give its side of the story. I don't have any reason to doubt you. I mean, which Marxist would doubt what you're saying? This is what we know happens, right, in the private sector. But it's about Parliament giving fair play. And KPMG is not here to say, but that's not quite true. We did send an email, it got lost in the cyberspace. We can show you, or Mr. Agallas was in Mongolia or something when we found him and so on. They might have their answers. So I think, in principle, I agree. What I want to suggest is we say our understanding is, if that is the case, we are utterly clear. You must cooperate, and we insist on it. Then they'll write me a 6-page letter, which I'll have to then read, because nobody else will read, maybe one of you will read, and then I must reply. So it's a lot of work, but fine, we have to do it. So in short, would it be fine if I drafted a letter? I can give it to you in the next 48 hours, you can tweak it, but let's not presume they're guilty. Simply, Bernard may be is acting in good faith. He's genuinely honest, I'm sure, but maybe he doesn't know that, they did send him an emissary, or somebody got an accident and he's in hospital now. Talking of which, by the way, I've got both a phone call and an SMS from a distraught Pinky Kekane to say that she is not well. That's why she's not here. She's not in Mongolia this time, amazingly. No, in Alaska. She's actually not well, okay? And Dick Hilary, as I told you, has got a family issue, and Derek Hanekom was meant to be at 10, and him I trust fully also. There must be some reason why he's not here, right? Now then, is that okay that I draft such a letter along those lines, saying that we understand you're not cooperating, instead of saying you are guilty of not cooperating, and hey, we're going to sort you out? What do you say?
I'm entirely happy with that. We do have to be fair. I mean,
Yeah,
we need to
fine.
say to them that
Okay.
an allegation has been made and they need to provide us with the next
Yeah, okay, allegation. Okay, then I don't show you the letter, but okay, I'll send it to you because you're all deeply suspicious of me, right? Not you, all of you. Some of you, it's hilarious. But anyway, let's move on.
Chair, you are a propagandist and you are doing it very well. And at least you cannot do it with me. Yeah, no, you don't win with me. You are trained to be the way you are. Chair, you see, once we adopt David's approach, there's already a motive. When I said we should not put the horse before the cart before the horse, English is not my mother tongue, so I can confuse these things sometimes. There was a specific reason. Had we went that route, yes, I can. Not even Floyd. I say now the issue is, you see, once we get involved in how the investigation is going to take place, we won't be able to deal with the report and make our own recommendations because we will have made the recommendations beforehand. And that's why I agree with you that as part of fair play, there's an investigation. We are not responsible for the scope. Unless if we want to give the scope, then I can say let's go to town about the scope and we need to check our mandate in terms of giving IRBA the scope of the investigations, right? To say investigate this part and investigate that part and come to this conclusion. blah, blah, blah. So, no, Chair, I'm helping you. You know, sometimes I always ask you to remember these things that I say. They might sound nonsensical at the beginning, but at the end, they are very helpful, you see. Because we want to broaden the scope in such a way that IRBA, with all the independent powers it has, it does the work, and it comes back to us. And there's a piece of legislation that's going to come. Through that piece of legislation, we're empowered to give it more powers. But if we go before, we run a risk of not wanting to empower it the way we want.
We hear you.
Because of the gallery we are at in the current conjuncture.
So you're saying basically if we write such a letter, even if it's a soft version, and say, look, we understand that you are not cooperating. If so, please cooperate. That's the basic sense. Even that will be like prejudicial to fair play is what you're saying. All right, fine.
You
Floyd,
see,
come in. Floyd,
can I finish the point, Chair?
You'll come in, yeah.
You know
very
why I'm
quickly.
saying that is because we've got powers to subpoena. So we can, later on, if we believe that things were not done thoroughly, having considered the report, to subpoena them to come and to account to us, you see?
You can do that, but you'll come in, Frank. Very quickly, Floyd, can we please move on? We're running out of time. Yes, Floyd.
No, I think let's just put this clear that what we needed from IRBA is an assurance that action is going to be taken on KPMG. I don't think we must call KPMG. Let them go, particularly on the content issues that relate to this process, including on them explaining why they are not cooperating. We must not do that. If they don't want to go to the hearing, IRBA knows what to do. They can continue on the basis of the allegations that are there and then reach a conclusion. It happens everywhere. So if you don't appear in a court of law, the court can proceed without you or can take certain actions. So IRBA knows what to do, because once we want to interfere on other things, like we don't have a lot of time, by the way, because why should we be listening to KPMG when it's already appearing before a process which we were endorsing here?
We can't. I've checked on that.
Yeah.
Legally, we cannot call it.
Yeah.
It's IRBA that's going. Now,
Let's
that's not the
use
issue. What are you saying about the letter? We shouldn't write the letter.
No, we shouldn't
Fine.
write the letter.
Okay, if you don't write the letter, fine. David,
Let's use the time that is
fine. Let's move
available.
on.
Let's use the time that is
Quickly.
available to
Fine.
call the
Okay,
GPF
let's move on
and
then to the
PSC to come and
JSC. Right, I'm
account.
ruling it's done. Can we move on to the JSC? To remind members, thank you very much. To remind members, can you come and sit here if you may? Or you can sit there, whatever you feel comfortable about. Now, to remind members, this is the second outflow, if you like, from the public hearings on the financial sector transformation process, right? So in other words, what we're doing here basically is, we did it with the CBDA. Tandy, please listen, don't let the guy disrupt you, right? You're no more in the same party or youth league or whatever. Now the thing is, can we focus on this issue, Tandy? The reason we are here is because there was a lot of skepticism about the figures provided by the JSE about the level of transformation, and the level of ownership and so on. And so we did the report, which we're going to look at tomorrow jointly with the Trade and Industry Committee. And so we decided we invited CBDA and the cooperatives, and this is the second tranche of it. To remind people once again, as we will say tomorrow, that report is not a be-all and end-all. It is part of an ongoing process of Parliament's two committees and other related committees looking at transformation. Thank you for coming. We know you, but you can quickly introduce yourself. There are old people here like Tandy. They have very bad memories. They're old and doddery. They forget. They can't even remember my name. Can you imagine whether there's any prospect at all they'll remember your name? Right, so introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Nikki Newton-King. I'm the Chief Executive of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I'm joined by my colleague Anne Clayton, who heads our public policy and who's been at the committee often, and it's a pleasure to see members of the committee again. I won't comment on my grey matter, but I will note Mr. Leese's point about multiple slides on one page. His eyes are obviously better than mine, but we did take the trouble to print them out in broader format. Personally, I've resorted to technology only, Chair. It's done my eyes no good whatsoever. But as you have indicated, Chair, we've been asked to explain the statistics. I do know that National Treasury is producing the ownership monitor, which we're very supportive of, and will be...
Treasury asked, are you going to do a reply? Momo's stuck on a flight, I'm told. Yeah, they want to respond as well, which is fine. It's your right to do so.
So Treasury is producing an ownership monitor, which we're very supportive of, and we have given them all the relevant facts that support the work that we did, and we would be very happy for them to take the work forward. So Chair, turning then to the presentation, I think it's important to understand what we talk about when we talk about the JSE. And market cap. If you look at slide 1, we break down the market cap by industry. The JSE isn't one company. It's obviously got lots of companies, nearly 400 companies, and you can see that by industry, the makeup of the JSE has changed between 2013 and 2017, and if we were to have run this backwards, the makeup would have changed dramatically. I think it's quite interesting how large financial services are, consumer goods, and how small relatively mining is as a percentage of the JSE. Turning then to the next slide, where we deal with actually the number of listed companies. The critical point for the committee to realize here is that we had a market cap of approximately 10 trillion rand, nearly 11 trillion rand, 10.6 trillion rand in 2013, made up of 389 companies. This year, that market cap is 15 trillion rand, and it's made up of fewer companies. So the committee might immediately say, how is this possible? Well, the first point is that the number of companies does not equate to the market cap. All right? The market cap is a function of the value. You can have fewer companies of much larger value, and your market cap can grow. That's the first point for the committee to sort of take away. Then turning then to the actual unpacking of the statistics themselves. And we unpacking the statistics as at the end of 2013 because those are the statistics as when we last published them. We have in fact updated them, but this work has been overtaken by Treasury's ownership monitor. They do that work, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm looking at Roy, as at the end of 2016. But the numbers are not dramatically different in the percentages. In the actual number of market cap, yes, but you'll see the percentages don't change dramatically. But let's just go back and get the framing correct. 10.6 trillion rand, the JSE market cap is at the end of 2013. From that, if you're trying to figure out how to count equities, you must deduct from that non-equity securities. Now, this might seem very strange to the committee, but we list things in our equities market that are quasi-equities. So pref shares, there are certain forms of debentures, etc., that are listed there. All right? You've got to take those out of the calculation, and that's nearly 735 billion rand. You've got to take that off to figure out, as a first charge, to figure out what are your equity securities. And that leaves you with 9.9 trillion rand. Then you've got to take out the companies that are outside the top 100. And I'll stop here. Our team that did this work for us, the independent team that did this work for us, only measured the top 100. Why? And this was an issue raised in the committee. Why did we only measure the top 100? Top 100 is in fact 95%, nearly 95% of the entire market cap. So they make up the bulk of the value on the JSE. They do not make up, obviously, the bulk of the number of listed companies. They make up the bulk of the value. So if you take the top 100 out, because we did not measure that, that's nearly another 500 billion rand that you take out. So now you're left with, you've started at 10.6, you're now left with 9.4 trillion rand. That is your top 100 equities. Now, of those top 100 equities, turning then to page 7, there are certain companies, groups, where there are cross-holdings. So let me give you an example. Anglo-American will have its market cap, and it will have Kumba as a cross-holding as part of that in there. And then there are certain treasury shares and shares held by government, and those are also essentially double counted in the market cap. So if you really want to figure out what's available, you must take those out as well. That's another nearly 600 billion rand. So you're now left from 10.6, you're at 8.8 trillion rand. The denominator matters when you're working out the maths, obviously, of these things. And then there are many companies, nearly 70 companies on the JSE, that have significant foreign registers. They are listed on other markets. So AB InBev would be an example of that. Those foreign registers are not available to you and I. They are available only to people who trade in the companies on those counters on the foreign markets, on London, on New York, etc. Interestingly enough, that is a significant portion of the market cap. And so that's 3.6 trillion rand. Nearly 34% of the entire market cap is actually not held in South Africa at all. It's held offshore somewhere. So you go from 10.6 to 5.2 trillion rand. All right? And now you've got that 5.2 trillion rand is available for purchase by South Africans. And it is at that stage that you can start to say, so how is that owned? And now, if you turn to page 9, this is where it's important to unpack that. Of the 5.2 trillion rand that at the end of 2013 was available for purchase in South Africa, 39% was held by foreigners. Because foreigners can trade on our market. Every day foreigners trade on our market. They can trade on our market, and they do trade on our market. So foreigners hold large portions of all of our shares. My own stock, the JSE, we're held nearly 50% by foreigners, as an example. MTN has foreign shareholders. They trade in South Africa using South African brokers to trade. Their shares are held in South Africa. That's in that 39%. And then you have to unpack the remainder. Of the remainder, 16% we haven't, as at the end of 2013, the analysts were not able to unpick because it requires a line-by-line analysis of a share register. We do not in this country require people to register race or gender. It is not as simple as sorting out the spreadsheet, therefore. They literally have to go and look at line by line and certify whether or not that person, Mr. Smith, is black or white, whether they're foreign or local. So it's an enormous exercise. So 16% unknown, uncounted, but you can assume that they're basically in the indirect or mandated investment space. They're not direct investment. And then you sort of, then you unpick the remainder, of which direct is 24% and indirect 21%. So that's how South Africa is held. That's the reason why the top 100 numbers work out like they do. The difference between us and other calculations that float around from time to time. And I think when Treasury unpacks it, you will see, I would be quite surprised if the numbers are dramatically different to this. But the difference is what you put in the denominator. If you don't exclude the foreign shareholding, if you don't exclude the Treasury shares, if you don't exclude, you end up with a larger denominator. So that's why it's very important to get the maths right. The facts are what the facts are. The shares are held as they are held, and what this shows you is that a large amount is held indirectly through mandated investments. This is very important. This means South Africans are saving through their pension funds, and it means from a policy perspective, the committee might want to consider what that means with regard to the responsibility we should be placing on pension fund trustees and the like to exercise the voice that comes from ownership. I think it would be a mistake to say there's no ownership rights there. Those rights are exercised indirectly because it's mandated, but they come together with the right to vote, the right to receive the economic proceeds of that. And so it's a very powerful, but I think underutilized space in an ownership spectrum. Direct schemes are obviously following the BEE schemes and the like. That South Africans, in our experience, do not trade in their own name as you find in more mercantile countries, more mercantile emerging markets like China and India, where lots of people trade in their own name, or in more developed markets like Australia, America, the United Kingdom, where people manage their own pension funds. Very different space. So that's why that's how this is broken up. That's why it works out as it does. And that was the first question the committee asked us to address, Chair, and I think the most important one. Then just briefly, the other questions, the remaining issues about how do we deal with using the influence that we have to influence the rest of the transformation that could happen in financial services. So on the next slide 10, I make the point, as I did the last time we spoke, that our listings requirements are our primary source of requiring certain behavior from companies. They are required to publish their gender transformation policies and statistics, and same effectively on BEE. At the last meeting, we were asked whether or not, why we don't set a quota, and why we don't, for instance, refuse to list anybody that doesn't comply with either of these. We don't set a quota because globally, where quotas are set, they are set at a national level. So for a quota to be set, it would need to be set at in Parliament. And were that to be the case, then we would apply that. What we have found is that companies publishing this information allows stakeholders to engage the companies about why is that representativity good enough for you? What are you doing to enhance your representativity from a gender and a BEE perspective? We do have an empowerment segment. This enables issuers to essentially list their BEE schemes there. We find that segment underutilized and not as liquid as you would imagine it should be. Because it is only for a BEE scheme and therefore allows only black people to trade with black people, you'd imagine that you've got certainty then as to who you could trade with. But we have found that it is not as liquid as it needs to be. And as we finally made the point at the last time we spoke, Chair, we do have an enterprise development program specifically focused on building strength, bench strength in our black stockbroking community, which we do by essentially giving them a rebate on their fees for the business they did with us in the last quarter, a rebate that they can then use towards their business in the next quarter. And what we have seen is this is starting to make a big difference in their training of their own staff and analysts and traders, etc. And we're starting to see a difference there in the representativity in their firms. So we are trying to do things that actually build that ecosystem, that is not about the JSE, the company, and our procurement spend and our diversity, because we dealt with that the last time. But beyond that, how do we use that influence? And so, Chair, perhaps I should stop there and let members ask whatever questions, if that is what you would appreciate.
Do we want to take Treasury's input now, or do we want to first raise questions? Yeah, what do you want to do? I'm easy. We have Treasury. Yeah, then can you respond quickly, Treasury? Not long, please, because the focus is on the JSE. Have you got a text or something?
Yes, Chair. We've got a report we prepared and a presentation. Unfortunately, we haven't printed it out.
All right, we'll speak to it then.
Okay, I'll speak
You give
to
us copies before the day is up.
Chair, but no, it's always the case. Why?
I've given up on this thing. What do you want me to do?
No, we can't give up on it.
Well, I've given
At least
up.
I want to see it
can't do more.
and make some notes.
All right. Nothing more I can do. I can do nothing. Yeah, there's nothing I can do. Yeah. Momo?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my plane was delayed this morning. Chair, basically, our input is what we've circulated before. Even when we've done the stylized notes. What we have, Chair, and what we want to give you, and we weren't sure whether it's for today or tomorrow, is a pretty technical research paper, which we do want to circulate. So when Roy is referring, he's obviously referring to the detail. There's no way he can talk through that now. But, yeah, so...
We need to be alert to this, right? The reason Zakele is not here is that he still hasn't finished. And you know what? There's nothing we can do about it. We asked people in the letter that we wrote to them to keep their contributions to 1,000 words maximum. Of course, very few people observed that. Then several people asked for extensions. I'm not going to call a committee meeting or a teleconference to ask you for permission. What can we do? They said the Monday was a holiday, last Monday and so on. So some people's submissions flowed in yesterday. So I spoke to Joan yesterday, and we both agreed that it'll be absurd for us to decide to vote on the report tomorrow. There's far too much coming in. So what we're doing tomorrow is taking forward the interim report. We will look, he's doing a table, Zakele is. You will probably get it at about 5 today. And people have to do some homework and look at it through the night. Don't kill somebody to do some work. And tomorrow we will look at the submissions from the participants in the hearings. And then say, okay, on this we agree, this we don't agree, and so on. And then we'll have to meet again to finalize the report. Now the question that arises, Momo, is you're not going to have much space tomorrow as I see it, because we're meeting from 10 to 1, and then in the afternoon we're meeting on the HPL and tax issues and so on. So how much of time are you hoping to have tomorrow? In that case, use it now. I think there's more latitude today, because if it's dealing with the issue of ownership and the other related issues to the JSE, deal with it now. Give us a quick overview. Tomorrow we'll allow you to table it, but I don't think we're going to have much time to discuss it. Is that agreeable? Let's give them 10 minutes to make an input. Fine, as incomplete as it might be. Shall we go for it quickly, Roy? 10 minutes you have.
Okay,
It's now 20 past.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think as Momo said, we have circulated this in a summarized form in that document called the Stylized Facts, which I think went to members about 2 weeks ago. But this is a much more detailed report which kind of fleshes out what was in the Stylized Facts. I think the point that we made in that Stylized Fact just relates to the need to attract foreign capital. So the system has to be aware, and I think Ms. Newton-King highlighted the fact that a large amount of our equities are held by foreigners, but also just like to re-highlight the fact that a large amount of government bonds are also held by foreigners. So depending on how you count, but approximately 36 to 40% of rand-denominated debt in South Africa is actually held by foreign players. So those are the foreign investors we often go on roadshows to. Typically, there'll be big pension funds from overseas, so typically like European pensioners who are saving money and are looking for a bit of return will put their money in South African government bonds, and they own government bonds around the world. So that's quite an important thing to highlight. Because I think just conceptually, if you think about the fact that foreigners take up a large percentage of, and particularly pension funds take up a large percentage of the ownership in the economy, that reflects the fact that we don't have much domestic savings here. I think these are the points we made in the Stylized Facts last time. And so what we've tried to do in this quite detailed research report is try and identify what is left over. So what is left over to South Africans and how is that owned? And, we came to some conclusions about the fact that there are still issues in terms of ownership that from the power that's left over. But importantly also just to highlight, as I think we did before, is that a lot of South Africans basically save through their pension funds. So, my whole wealth is in my pension fund, as is I think many other people in the room. And so that's really where you must look at, and I think Mr. King also highlighted it. That's really where you must look at in terms of understanding ownership trends in the economy, is to understand that actually the pensioners are where the money lies. And that's because they've accumulated this money over the course of their careers. And so this creates kind of a big pot of money. And we estimate that about 4 trillion is in retirement funds and long-term insurance, so in retirement funds, so 4 trillion in that. And about 2.5 trillion is actually in your house. So residential buildings make up about 2.5 trillion of your savings. And then South Africans have about 1 trillion in cash and about 2.5 trillion in other financial assets. So by far the most money savings are actually held firstly in your pension, and then secondly in your house, in residential buildings. And that's really where savings is in the South African economy. So that's just to give some background to how the money is divided. But obviously the issue then is in occupational pension funds. And so what we've tried to do is to identify sort of the racial composition of these pension funds to better understand how they feed through into the economy. That's quite hard because pension funds are changing over time. We don't necessarily have good statistics on racial composition of pension funds. Pension funds are quite different. So the PIC, the pensioners stay in the pension fund. So when I retire, I actually will stay in the GPF. But the GPF will look after my retirement. In normal other pension funds, sometimes what happens is you leave your pension fund and it kind of goes into an annuity, and so it moves. So pension funds are quite hard to estimate, but we've got some estimates in the report on that. it is obviously low, but growing over time. And then, I don't want to go into too much detail because I think we've covered this before, but essentially we come out at estimating that the top 100 JSE listed companies similar results to what the JSE found, but just highlighting the fact that the black ownership through institutional mandated funds is about 13% of overall ownership, and direct black ownership about 10%. So, Chair, I think we'll go on. We've done some work on specific case studies because I think the Sasol case study has been quite an interesting one in the press. But what we've done, and that goes into quite a lot of detail in the report, is identify other case studies. So Vodacom, for example, is quite interesting. And if you want to give me some of those details or talk about the Sasol, but that's maybe something to look at is, how are BE deals structured and how do they work and so forth.
But I guess just Roy's been now a bit too brief. Yeah. So Chair, we've got pretty, and if you look at the stylized document, we showed what's foreign ownership, what's domestic institutional, and what we have tried to estimate is black ownership. Now, whatever you do, Chair, and this is the issue, that you've got to make not assumptions, but if you take retirement funds, and Roy, what's the percentage? I'm just trying to get my page. I think it's about 20.
Yeah, in the JSE? Or
yeah, in the JSE.
That's when we go to the slide.
Okay. Now,
yeah,
if we, about, no, it's 40% of their, yeah, so it's the other 24%, right? So what it means, Chair...
Chairperson, can't we be given this document, because even the people who are presenting are not even sure of the figures that are in there. I don't think we're doing justice to this discussion, because like we need to be given concrete information, because there are certain things that we must make follow up on, and tomorrow we're discussing the transformation of the financial sector. We must be guided by concrete information. So can we be given the document? We can give you a break. And you said you have sent it to us. I've not seen it. I'm looking for it here. I can't see the document.
Okay. The document we've given to you, not today, the last time we met was...
Hey, I'm saying even the last time you met, I don't see it.
Okay.
Can I be given
what
the
happens
document?
sometimes, Floyd, if you don't attend a meeting, they print the forms and then they don't subsequently email to those who are absent, right? But there was a document presented, right? Now, but fine, the thing is that if it's the view of the majority that you do not want to discuss this issue while you don't have the report, I'm fine by that. So what is the view of the majority? Do you want to discuss it or not?
I was in the meetings when National Treasury was here, right? I don't know, like...
That's fine, Floyd, can we move on? This
also,
is not an
it's
issue
not sensible
we deal with
to
here.
say that
Nobody hides any
we must be
documents
given the document, because...
Fine. Now,
we
the
need
question
to
really
discuss
before this committee
clearly.
is, do you want to discuss this matter or not? I don't really care either way. Really, I don't have a view. You want to withdraw that whole input then. Thandi?
Chair, I'll subject myself to the presentation made by the GSC.
Right, fine. So we're not discussing that, okay? Because there's no copy. You will arrange for the committee secretaries. They must do their job. I'll do a lot of their job as it is, but I'm not going to do more. Fine, that is it. We're not discussing that. Let's move on. Okay. Questions then on the JSE. Right, Thandi.
Thanks, Nick, for the presentation. I'm going to subject myself to the underutilized ownership space. I need you to give us in percentage terms. What is it? Especially classify it according to the market cap, so that we have an impression as to which bracket does this belong to, these indirect investments. Secondly, I'm interested to know whether JSC has a specific program to either encourage or lobby business to enlist in the primary sectors of the market cap those that you enlisted that occupy 27% and 24%, because that's your most important segment that occupy your 100 listed companies. That's because the penetration needs to be there. We can't sit here and say some of them are in the indirect space and are in the underutilized sector, and we leave it at that. It means there will not be penetration to your important, and I'm not talking about the denomination that relates to what has been presented in terms of your government bonds and the role of treasury. Here we're talking about individual businesses that should either have listed in your primary space and have not. And how do we get them to buy? Because in terms of the market share, 34% is foreign owned. It's foreign direct investment. And if you tabulate it further, if you look at, that's why I want that segment, I want you to tabulate it in that format, because it will show you the spaces that are not occupied by black economic empowerment principles that we want to pursue. And that's why I asked this question. Do you have a program to lobby them, to enlist? It's not enough to see parties blowing the horn. I've seen that. I watch that a lot. But to make sure that when you look at by market cap and by industry, the impact in the 15 trillion, who occupies how much? I think you get the drift of what I'm trying to get, so that when we engage on that, there is that table. Because the reason why I said I'll subject myself to it, because I thought National Treasury will occupy that space and give us a tabulated form of that. And as we speak, we don't have it in front of us. So it becomes very cumbersome then to and if we speak about either in prof shares or debentures, that also becomes an interest to look at the reflection thereof. And we're not discounting the need to continue to have the 34% foreign direct investment and so on. We're trying to say, when we look at our own listings in the domestic market, what do we encourage? You know, and how do we start to build it up? It might not be realizing fruition in the coming 10 years, but it might realize fruition in the coming 20, 30 years. Because we'll have got to the market cap that traditionally was not occupied by this indirect investment because of failure to utilize this ownership space. Not because there's restrictions, maybe because there's never been enough lobby to say, look, have we ever considered, and maybe it's done by people who encourages people to invest, to say, have you considered to do your investment in this market cap and not this one, and see how you can benefit from that? Because I listened to one economist who said that there's a tendency to want to invest in the short-term investments and don't look in the long-term investments. And then other people who have enough capital then plays into that space. I think you get the point I'm trying to get. Thanks.
Comments or contributions, questions? Yes, Mr. Lees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so the number of listed companies has decreased over the last 4 years. And so just, you know, I'm just the layman here, but so the number of companies that are listed has decreased. The number of shares probably have also decreased, although there might have been some rights issues and other kinds of issues. So when it comes to your business, it's the trading of securities, of shares. And so can you explain to me what influence the the company in which those shares are held has over who owns or buys or sells these shares, if any. So what I'm trying to ask you is there any way that you as the stock exchange or even the board of directors of a company can influence who trades in these securities and to achieve a particular ideological outcome, which may or may not be good? We're not discussing that, but practically, how is it possible to actually influence the ownership of those shares, given that the number of listings has decreased? So what that indicates is that not many new listings have come on during that period, and we probably know why, given the economic climate that the country is in, and the lack of any will to really invest in the economy at the moment in any big way. So if we could just get some understanding.
Who's next? Floyd.
And thanks, Chair. The number one is, I think we must maybe have to respond on who owns the JSE, the company, not the broad listed companies, like the company JSE, and what is its value, and what is the degree of transformation in JSE, the company. What is the extent of black ownership? What is the extent of women ownership? What is the extent of women participation in the board of JSE, the company? That is one that they want to deal with. You mentioned the figure of the market value of shares that are not traded in the JSE, like you mentioned, like that, AB InBev. Who else is part of that 3.6 trillion? Like, we must have a clarity of which other company is part of that group that is within the 3.6 trillion that are partially listed in the JSE, but their shares are not traded in South Africa. And then and not what National Treasury is trying to do. I would love to hear from you as JSE of what is the breakdown of the direct owners, like the direct shareholders, in terms of the racial composition, more specifically to say, outside of the institutional investors and mandated investors, what is the racial breakdown of the direct shareholders in the JSE? And then in the mandated investments, I want to get a clear illustration of those indirect owners, which ones are publicly owned and which ones are privately owned. So the PIC will have its own portion, and then the other mandated institutions that are not publicly owned. So I think that will be very useful as well. And then you say that as part of your contribution to transformation, you just expect as part of your listing requirements that the companies must have a gender policy and then must disclose or report on how far are they going in terms of fulfilling their own gender policy. And that also applies to how they deal with black economic empowerment. They must just publish whether they are compliant to B policies and what is their B scorecard on the constant. So you have never given any quota. And you are suggesting that Parliament should be the one that gives a quota if we were to deal with the issue of gender transformation and racial redress in terms of the companies that are in the JSA. I think that, Chair, In light of the discussion which we're going to have tomorrow and finalizing the financial sector transformation perspective, this is one of the issues that we must listen to attentively, that the JSE just expects the companies to disclose on gender policy and on BEE and everything else, cannot give a quota, but Parliament should at least give some sense of guidance in terms of what it should be, because I strongly believe that we should prescribe that the boards of all listed companies must be 50% female to reflect the gender dynamics in South Africa, because as things stand, I suspect that at the bare minimum it might be 80% male dominated. So most of the listed companies and mostly the huge corporations that are number 1, number 2, number 3 in the JSE are run by males almost exclusively. So I think that is one of the things that we'll have to give, and that is the role of Parliament in any way to deal with redress issues, at least in South Africa, because the Constitution compels us to pass legislation that should seek to achieve equality and redress the imbalances of the past. But I also think that we should legislate, we'll agree on the figure on black participation, on the direct owners. We must not confuse the mandated owners with the direct owners. We must find, there must be a mechanism where companies that are listed in the JSE should say that these shares are exclusively available to black people. It has been done. Sasol tried it, it collapsed now. MTN is in the process of doing it, of saying that these shares are traded for black people. So that there must be a certain requirement that is dealt with, so that we substantially transform the South African economy in terms of ownership and in terms of control, so that there is some sense of balance. It cannot be that the boards of listed companies are predominantly white males that are dominating, and it's a boys' club that is running the show in terms of what really happens. Even the Business Leadership South Africa organization that represents most of the listed companies, I think CEO are the only female there in terms of the people who are participating there, and there's possibly 2 or 3 black people. And the rest is white males, reflecting what the JSE is all about. I think that is one of the things that have to be dealt with differently in terms of the JSE. But we need to take decisive action. At least a framework is there that we could legislate later on that the listing requirements of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange or Securities Exchange should have a clear gender requirement and a clear black empowerment redress requirement, which must be infused there. And we must not listen to, I think, what is craziness of National Treasury's attempt to confuse the numbers in terms of the racial composition and state of ownership of the economy in South Africa, because it's very problematic. And it amounts to what I said when the minister was here, that the department is trying to retain the status quo and must be rejected.
Anybody else? No. Do you want to reply to that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So, Honourable Tobias's point about what are we doing to encourage greater listings by black entrepreneurs, and a large amount of that is about making sure that we talk to entrepreneurs at the right stage of development, because the public market space is not the right space for everyone. So we do spend a lot of time talking to them, trying to find entrepreneurs. There are people doing amazing things in this country, not all of whom, interestingly enough, want to be in the public space, even if they are big enough. And it speaks a little bit to Honourable Shivambu's sort of point about people fear that when you're in the public space, there are now further requirements that sort of essentially are meant with the best will in the world, but constrain one's ability to do things. This is not a South African thing. This is a thing around the world. My peers in other exchanges are all engaging with their policymakers about whether or not the listings requirements are now set so onerous that in fact it's actually better for people to stay private and to get money to fund their entrepreneurial dreams from private sources rather than public sources. But in this country, there are still a lot of very interesting entrepreneurs out there, and that's what we spend our time doing. And interesting enough, people, what we've seen, for instance, in the 2 fishing listings this year, both of which are predominantly black-owned, coming out of strong black-managed entrepreneurial, already listed companies, and then spinning out subsidiaries. Those are also good places to talk. So we do speak to lots of entrepreneurs and about what it takes to be listed, what it takes to be ready. It's for that reason that we do already have, AltX, which is our smaller board, and some go straight into the main board. But you've got to get people ready for that. There is capital, although as Honourable Lise is saying, in these economic conditions, there is definitely lower appetite for listing than before. But once people are ready, the point of where they list, we really want companies that are able to be very, very liquidly traded. So the main board is a wonderful place for that. And it then speaks to how do you influence them? How do you influence, how much can a company influence who buys their shares? All CEOs and CFOs spend a fortune of time talking to investors. They want diverse investors, and it's because the BEE scorecards incentivize a more broad base of ownership, certainly a transformed ownership base. So you spend an enormous amount of time with the really big institutional investment houses in town, also with foreign investors, but also some of the more targeted investors. And you can have a level of influence about whether people are prepared to be interested in your company, or whether or not, because some are not interested in certain sectors, people buy not really only the sector, but also the management team. So you've got to talk to people about why you are a management team that you're prepared to be, that should be backed. So I would not say that there is no influence, but clearly people are, there is some influence that you can have, but clearly in conditions where people are stressed, financially stressed, or nervous about growth prospects, people are much more cautious about putting new money on the table for investment, and that is an issue for SA Inc. Our plummeting down the world competitiveness rankings is not going to do any good for anybody, not entrepreneurs wanting to raise money and not exchanges wishing to create a space for trading. So yes, the number of listings have decreased, but you can influence who invests. But let's also bear in mind, number of listings might have decreased, but the market cap has nearly gone up by another 50%. Why is that? Because our really big champions are really very valuable now. And are being traded not only in South Africa but outside the country as well. And that's why you see this difference. It speaks then to, if I might, to Honourable Shivambu's point about the list of companies that are dual listed. We will get the committee the list, but from memory, it's around 70 companies. But the likes of a Steinhoff, who now have a listing offshore, will increase the amount of shares that are held on foreign registers. AB InBev is another example. Sasol is another example. And companies that have big foreign shareholdings but do not have foreign registers would include the likes of Standard Bank, Nedbank, ourselves, MTN, etc. They are South African listings only, but with strong foreign ownership in this country. These are just different models of ownership, and you know that you see around the world as well. I think Honourable Shivambu's point about the breakdown of ownership, direct and indirect by race, as well as the JSE's owning, is because I think, if my memory is correct, when I last spoke, you weren't at that session, but we dealt with that, Chair, and I need your guidance. We dealt with that in detail when I spoke at the last session. I'm very happy to unpack it briefly if it is.
In this committee, we don't, if a member is absent for whatever reason, we don't repeat. But given the relevance of this to members will allow a brief overview, but please don't cover that. It's not fair on the rest of us here.
Okay, I will briefly just indicate on the question of, you asked for the racial breakdown of direct ownership. As I said, 24% owned directly, and the racial breakdown is 10% by black people and 14% by white people. And indirect, the number is 21%, of which 13% is held through black mandated investment schemes and 8 by white people. Now, mandated investment schemes, a scheme is not black or white. It is the individual participants in the scheme, and this is the issue that Roy was indicating. It is Mr. Haverman was indicating, very difficult to unpack, and I know Treasury's ownership monitor has unpacked that. So, for instance, it would not be correct to say that, for instance, the PIC is either black or white. It will have a portion that is held on behalf of black people and a portion that is held on behalf of white people. But not all mandated investments are public mandated investment schemes. All our pension funds, all the private sector pension funds are all mandated investment schemes. But the largest ones, the biggest players in the space are the public investment, the public schemes. Let me just get to the final. I'll come back to our own contribution on that by just revisiting briefly what I said before. I note Honourable Shivambu's point about his disappointment on the fact that we don't believe it is our role to set a quota on gender or race. Nowhere in the world has the exchange set that quota on gender. Obviously, race is a South African specific issue, but clearly, if this is something that Parliament, from a policy perspective, decides to set, then companies would comply. Where we have seen the biggest change on gender representativity at the board, for instance, in France, in Scandinavia, these have been set at a parliamentary level, and it clearly drives behaviour. So that would be an interesting outcome. If I then, it's possible. It's very possible. But already what you're seeing is in relation to the entire focus on a company's commitment to transformation, both from a gender and from a BEE scorecard. So not just ownership, but ownership is obviously very important. These are features of conversations that companies have with investors now all the time, because the codes, for instance, have a very interesting incentivizing mechanism built into them. So it's in companies' interests to transform if they are looking specifically for government business. So, Chair, then just briefly dealing with the JSE's own position. If I just get my slides up from the last thing, so that we talk to the exact same numbers that we have that I spoke to at the last meeting. We have 11 board members. We have of whom 6 are black, of whom 5 are female. 5 of the 11 are female, including
6 collectively. How many African, how many so-called coloured, how many Indian?
I have not got that breakdown exactly in front of me, but I'm sure we could pick that up. It's only 6 people, but nonetheless, from memory, 4 of the 6, from just visuals in front of me now, my colleague here will check me on this, but 4 of the 6 will be black African. Of the 11, 5 are female, including our chairman, including the head of risk, the risk committee. So, the proper serious positions on the board are held by black females. We have, on my executive is 9 people today. When I spoke the last time, we had an executive of 11. We've reduced that to 9, of whom 6 are female, and of whom 4 are black, and of that 2 are black African, including my head of IT. My CFO is an Indian female, seriously transformed bench. In fact, I think it would most financial services companies would struggle to be as transformed as that perspective. My entire staff at the moment, 407 staff members, of whom 60% are black, of whom 52% are female.
black
Yes, we
is
will.
too abstract.
we
In
will
our report,
definitely
we
do that.
said that as well. So we want to know African, Indian, so-called colours.
Absolutely no problem. No problem on that, Chair. Our ownership, we have just over 18% black ownership on the high water mark, and 8% direct, of which 8% is direct. The PIC is our largest single shareholder. It's
We allow a certain latitude. I'm chairing. Just ignore them. Answer Floyd. When Tandy interrupts, Floyd will say, why are you interrupting? When Floyd interrupts, Tandy will say, hey, you know what, I'm the chair. It flows. I know Derek hates that, but he'll have to live with it. I'll soon be gone, then he will miss me. Right, can we move on?
I'm in your hands, Chair.
Let them say what they want to say. A certain degree of interjections is good for discussion. Otherwise, we get very formalistic.
Yeah.
Right, then we can say, Honorable Chairperson, how honorable am I? Nevertheless, Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Mr. Lees, Honorable Mr. Shivambu, colonial terms, right? But anyway, that's what Parliament's Rules Committee say. I have to abide by them. Though you can say Mr. and Ms. without honorable. Can you remember I'm the chair? Right, so answer Floyd, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in your hands.
I'm just the chair for now, right? So
I
fine.
recognize the authority of the Chair completely, Chair. The question put to me was, what percent does the PIC own? The PIC owns nearly 12% of the JSE. It's their average holding, and of JSE Limited, the listed company. The PIC owns nearly 12%, but I would make the point that not all that 12% is categorized as black in our black ownership stats. Okay, and then the final question to just reflect on is we are a level 2 under the scorecards at the current codes. Depending on where the new codes would go, that number would change, Chair. I think I've addressed the questions put to me so far.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to do an interruption now too, if I may, just quickly on the price of JSE shares and how they're traded. They're not traded in the normal kind of way, or are they?
JSE is listed. I think if your business proposition is that it's a good idea to be listed, you should lead by example. So the JSE is listed. Our shares are traded in the financial services sector of the JSE.
Chair, so like black stock brokers only traded about 2% of all the tradable value in the JSE in the past year. That is what APSIP says, and it looks like it's a credible information. You say that you can't say much in terms of the quota for gender and race in terms of what could be the requirement. But I'm sure you can do something about stock broking. I'm sure you can be finding either as a listing requirement or as some degree of driving transformation on stock broking and the people who are involved in the whole exchange of shares at the Securities Exchange.
Yeah, I mean, we have really worked hard to increase the universe of black stockbrokers, not only the firms, but the individuals trading. So, in fact, I sign the certificates for people who write their exams, and there's no doubt that the number of people writing is predominantly black. So you're getting the root stock in at the moment. But the APSIP research is a very important research, and I'm sure you will be asking this question of the investment managers, because the flow goes asset owner to asset manager to broker. And the brokers earn that flow, and the reality is that in order to trade, you do need a fair amount of capital, so that if you really want to do the big trades, because we need to make sure that every trade settles, you need a fair amount of capital to do that. So we relook at our capital requirements to make sure they're not so onerous that it's impossible for smaller companies to come. But micro companies will never get big institutional work. They just do not have the sophistication, the technology, or the capital to be able to do that. Most of the big institutions trade almost fully electronically, not completely, but almost fully electronic. It's an expensive thing to build a robust trading house. But the ABSA research was also beyond just the brokers. It was also the amount of money that goes from the asset owners to the black intermediaries. And so that's something to ask the asset owners, to ask the PIC, how do you allocate your investments? But ultimately, you need robust intermediaries, and finding manners that allow smaller houses to be robust enough to get some of that flow and then to grow through that is a challenge. Our portion of that is to make sure that we do essentially give black stockbrokers a cheaper ability to trade, which should mean that their ability to price to their clients is better than untransformed stockbrokers. And you can already start to see flow increase very gently along that basis. That lower price comes through essentially rebates, which they then use for to fund their activities in the next quarter. But you've got to get the whole ecosystem working in that direction. And my experience is that that's what people are doing. But it is a slow thing. What we shouldn't, I think, expect to happen is you have a whole lot of small black stockbrokers servicing small black investors. South Africans don't invest in their own name. There's not enough savings to do that as an ordinary course. It's just not enough savings. If we were growing as an economy and we had lots of people with lots of disposable income, completely different thing. The flows come from the mandated investments. That's where one's got to look at how one gets those flows directed. Sure.
Just quickly, does GSE have a comprehensive policy on the transformation of stock broking, or is just something you're responding to now and then as on an ad hoc basis that you think you'll do this and that and everything else? Is there a comprehensive transformation agenda and program which you can say that within this particular period, this is what we have achieved and this is how it can be rolled out, and these are the other role players that should play a meaningful role in that regard?
Yes. Chair, through you, yes, we do, and it's for that reason that we in fact even have a Black Stockbrokers Forum where we engage with them about those things that we could do that would make the most beneficial difference. Because there's no point doing things that make no difference just because they seem like they're a good idea. And it is clear that a clear consensus that the thing that will make the most difference is to essentially make trading cheaper, which is what we've done by giving the rebates.
Thanks, Chair. Nick, you raise a fundamental issue when you say the question should be how, for instance, does the PIC allocate? Because to me the issue is there, Floyd. No, I'm using it as an argument.
I think we should pose that question that you and Floyd are raising on the PICs here shortly.
No, Chair. When I want you said I'm heckling. I know where Floyd is going. I know the interest that he carries. But then I was the howler. So I'm fine.
What is a
now I'm saying, you see, she raises a fundamental issue about allocation, because if you expect somebody to trade when there's limitations in terms of capital liquidities, doesn't matter your transformation agenda, then it's not going to work. That's why maybe we should understand that it's in the best interest for you to see transformation, because then you will see a lot of people on the floor. But my interest, it's the tools that those who doesn't have access to use, the softwares that they're using. If it's not sophisticated enough to be able to maybe it's an element that I know you will not want to invest in that, but I don't know who should invest in that to make it easier, so that how they do it, how they broker, makes it easy for them. Because if they don't have the necessary tools to be able to use softwares that in the immediate, as and when shares are sold, they are there and they're able to do it, then voila. But you said, and to me there's an undertone. If you say it's how PIC allocates, there's an undertone that suggests that you say they should be, in fact, allocating more. Or how does it work?
Sure. Chair, if I might respond, I don't mean to create an undertone. I'm merely making the point that in order to trade, you need the flow of.
I used the wrong word, undertone, but I wanted us to
Sure.
to advise us on that one, because that's where you unlock this thing.
You unlock it. There are multiple parts of this parts in this ecosystem. All of us must play our role. So, for instance, if you start at the very beginning, the asset owner needs to say, I want to buy or sell. So it starts with cash and now wants to buy a share. It has to instruct someone to do that. In this country, most assets are held through asset managers, pension funds through asset managers. So the pension fund trustees have a role to say, I'd like this to be dealt with in a particular way. Mr. Asset Manager, okay, can you please do it for me? So they must set an example of what they have a role about where do I want to invest and who would I like to invest it for me, okay? The asset manager has a role because they choose which brokers they are going to use to execute those trades. The brokers, we have a role relative to the brokers to make sure that all brokers have a fair chance to execute on our markets. And if you just concentrate on our side for a moment, that comes to part of it is the cost of trading, so I've addressed that. And part of it is the technology that we use. The reality is that there is a difference between a really large, mega international broker that brings in technology that they use on exchanges around the world, and the amount that they've invested in that, compared to the amount that a smaller broker here will be able to use. We can't influence that, but what we can influence is that any type of broker should be able to interface with our trading engine. You don't want our technology to be so sophisticated that it excludes people who don't have industrial strength trading engines to interface with our core system. So we all have to play our role. So I think across the chain, people are doing their bits. I know the PIC, for instance, has said to people, we will not engage with you unless you have a very diverse staff base. So our brokers, for instance, are always talking to the PIC and being pushed by the PIC to build their diversity. So the PIC is doing its bit. PIC does its bit to the issuers, saying, well, where's your diversity? I really wouldn't want to create an impression that they don't do anything. The question for all of us in the chain is whether we have done enough to build the diversity. But we must step back and look at this entire thing, is that this is a market under pressure. This is an economy that is not growing. And an expectation that says we will radically change things when we have no growth is going to be, I think, unrealistic. It's going to be, we should be spending as much time on those policy interventions that build growth. That doesn't mean we should not spend time on transformation, not saying that at all, but we've got to build growth to be able to accelerate transformation personally.
No, but I think we must deal with that quickly, Chair, that the issue of CEO, you know, as a matter of fact, that even in instances where the economy grew, its composition of white dominance has not changed in terms of stockbroking and everything else. How do you explain, like, you can make it 10 times bigger than it is now, but the fact of the matter is that you are saying that there are lots of hurdles or boundaries for black stockbrokers to enter into the market. How are they going to enter? That is what we must be dealing with now, to say, as the JSE, what exactly are you doing to facilitate the participation of black people in stockbroking? That is one of the things that we cannot relegate to economic growth. Economic growth will deal with. We'll deal with at the political level, and of course business will get involved in a certain degree, but we'll deal with when we take over government and then we'll take it to different directions. But deal with the transformation issues that are urgent now, because it can be big, 10 times bigger. It will just be more white people who are entering into the same space and dominating the show.
Thanks, Chairman. In terms of the risk involved in trading in shares, you know, there's a forward price ratio that one looks at, and so in an economy, it's not growing, it's not as stable as it should be. Isn't it one of the reasons that we're not getting the people into the market or onto the JSE or trading in shares? not that that ratio is too high.
Well, the investment. Sorry,
If anybody else wants to raise anything, I would like to make a suggestion if the meeting agrees. We had planned to finish, if I'm right, Alan, is it 13:30? Is that when the lunch comes? Because we had two major items on the agenda. But my sense is this meeting is beginning to flag, okay? So I don't think we have to sit here till 13:30. What I think we have to do is begin to round up and come to some, if you like, if possible at least, consensual positions on what we want to put in the report, which is the next item I would like to raise. Our report that we're going to look at tomorrow. Secondly, we have to accept that we need further engagements, but we need to organize a much more focused discussion, where between Zakele, Antonia, and ourselves, we prepare a list of questions and so on, and that we have that exchange with you early in the, well, sometime in the next quarter, meaning 2018. But what I would like is that we consider beginning to round up. Because, look, it's a long day, and for the ANC comrades, it's here till 7:30 p.m. So can I get some advice on what the majority feel? As I say, if you outvote me, it's fine. I'm just telling you what I think. I've been outvoted a lot today, so I'm getting used to it. So, you know, not least by my own ANC comrades, meaning one in particular. So fine, go ahead, Tandy.
There's one issue I'm picking up, and Nikki will correct me. It's an issue of a diversified portfolio that must be addressed in terms of how all other chains find themselves playing a role. That's how I captured it. And I might not have an immediate resolution to that, because the engagement doesn't happen at this level, according to my limited understanding. Because some get management instructions on how they're going to trade. And I don't want to tell you what I'm thinking about it as I sit. But I thought to understand Nikki to be saying, they actually encourages it, because people get better scorecards and incentives if they are attending to the issues that we raised. But I want to leave it at that, because I'm applying my mind on it. I'm not an economist, so I'm very slow how I'm going to come to that conclusion as to how, because that's the part that I want us to unlock. And she might not want to say certain things here now, up until we have the homework with our counterparts from National Treasury. I don't know. I'm going to leave it at you. Others are political statements. So I don't know.
Political statements, you too, but what I think you're trying to say is it narrowly ideologically driven statements, right? Even that's allowed, fine. Can we move on? Meaning that, are we more or less agreeing, because nobody seems to be objecting vigorously, that we begin to round up by 12:30, we conclude 1 hour ahead? It means the ANC study group can also meet now for one part of its study group meeting. The joint one will take place as planned at 5:30. Is that agreeable, that we round up in the next 15, 20 minutes? Right, good. Can you answer, please?
I will, Chair, thank you. I'm sorry I'm responsible for the flagging of the meeting,
No,
but
it's not
I'm
you,
very
it's
happy to
members.
give your
They're
time
not
back.
challenging enough questions. A lot of rhetoric here, but that's my view, which I'm entitled to.
Don't get involved. No, I'm just, the last time the chairman walked off the podium when I was at a meeting, it got ugly. So I'm just like no, I'm a little. Mine too, Chair. Mine too. Honourable Lisa's point. I think that people become very cautious about investing when the environment is stormy and risky, and so it's risk. You know, when you look at what's happening, people are not going to be feeling that this is a great time to be there. So therefore, to invest, you require a bigger return. So your Ps are going to have to, you know, they have to essentially compensate for the risk that you see. But ultimately, people who've got hard-earned cash don't want to lose it. So they end up eventually saying, enough, I'm not putting any discretionary spend in the market. And that will impact everybody. It'll impact the activity across the board. It'll impact valuations in due course too. And then just to end with Honourable Shivambu's point, I'm not suggesting that we should not do things. at all. I think there are important things for everybody in the chain to do, and they are already doing things, is the point that I was trying to make. I was expanding on that by saying there would be that much more capacity to do things that would make a very big difference if we were a growing economy. But in the meantime, we've got to do the things that we're doing, and we are already doing quite a lot there. That is the sorts of things that one does. One looks back and says, wow, you've moved to here from there. In every given day, it doesn't feel to be such an extraordinary move. But once you go back and you say, wow, okay, now look at how many individual black stockbrokers are there. That might actually also be an interesting stat for the committee, is the actual individual black stockbrokers over the last 10 years that we've brought in, the individual black traders and so on. I think that would give the committee a sense of actually what is happening there. And so, Chair, I think I'll leave it at that. And
maybe Chair, the CEO must give us a breakdown on what is the policy on stockbroking and what is the progress which he says has been recorded in that regard, and then we can look into that and we'll make our own observations.
We will submit that if that pleases the Chair.
You see, there are a lot of issues that are slightly hanging in the air. So basically, I want members, because remember, we are not voting on the FST hearings report tomorrow. We are taking it forward, and we'll vote on it within 2 weeks or so, right, if that's okay with members. So what I would suggest is that members be given 48 hours to put more questions. Zakele, by the way, has not been here, but Antonia's here. Maybe she wants to put more questions, and we send it to you. Let's say, what's today? Today is Tuesday. Can members let us have it by Thursday, 5 p.m.? On Friday, we'll send you the questions such as they are, and then we would like you to respond by next Tuesday. Is that okay? There won't be millions of questions, so that's the one aspect. And the other aspect are the outstanding questions, outstanding answers, because you need more time to, and that Antonia may have done a record. We can send that to you, right? So, in other words, can you let us, okay, let's be realistic. Next Wednesday is fine. I mean, you got the stuff. You got a big staff. I mean, you're not like a committee like ours, which the chair has to do a lot of administration here. Maybe you can forego one of your people to help me to do administration, because I'm a politician. I spend most of my time doing administration. Now, that's not going to enamor you to me, but anyway. All right, fine. You're being provocative now, but yeah, I haven't started. Right, fine. Just ignore me for now. I'm the chair. Who cares? Now, you see, I'm being very brutalized today. But anyway, on a more serious note, what do you say? Can you deliver by next Wednesday? Right. Can members give us more focused, directed questions, please? Right. And as Thandi will say, not political ones, only technical ones. Okay. All right, Antonia. Can you help us, my sister, with the outstanding issues that you think we need further information on? And Zakele has just come in. To let you know on your emails now, and Derek, can you check his phone and see whether he's got an email that gives him the financial sector hearings report? He's always, you see, the national intelligence is interfering in his emails. That's got nothing to do with us. He must stop misbehaving, right? There's an email there right now. Is that right? Has it gone on, Alan? Okay. Derek, just look at his phone and see if he's got it. You'll see he hasn't got it. Right. So, colleagues, you have got right now on your emails the grid or the matrix, whatever word you want to use, that Zakele has done of all the submissions we received from the participants in the hearings in response to our letter to be discussed tomorrow. Okay? Those of you who don't have it in your email, please prove to me you don't have it. Thank you. Right. Now, in respect of what we've suggested, you're fine with that. Members, are you fine with that? Right. Now, let's then tie up things to the extent we can. We still want to hear Treasury, even if some of us will say that Treasury is a sort of organ of white monopoly capital or whatever, and whatever. The truth is they have a right to reply. Now, the question I want to ask you is, can we now try to bring to some sort of a head, if you like, what do we want to put in the report? If you look at the FST hearings report, you will see that we've said very little about the JSE specifically. What we have said a lot about is the ownership reconstruction racially and in terms of gender repeatedly. The issue that we haven't addressed, that's why I put there softly, because the interim report, let's hear, do we legislate or not, right, on these matters? The EFF has said legislate. Personally, I've said I'm sympathetic, but once again, it's not for me to decide. The ANC study group will address that this evening, right? What I'm trying to say is, what do we want to say specifically about the JSE? What do people now, having heard this, what do we want to say? Floyd, I can predict it, but go because you're the one putting your hand up.
We should give guidance on what the CEO said we must give guidance on, much more concretely on the gender quota for the boards of all listed companies and the racial composition of the boards, and in terms of the ownership as well, in terms of the shares that must be traded by and amongst black people. That is one of the much more decisive direction that we can give, and then also give a guidance in terms of the whole stockbroking, and we'll see what is we can agree on a targeted figure or percentage of black participation, and then the mechanisms of how that is dealt with will be dealt with separately.
It's our decision now. Parliament must decide. The JSE can stand for election if it wants, any time. 2019 is looming, right? And the chances are the ANC will not get 75% this time. So there might be a prospect for...
Not even 45%. What is...
Floyd, no one. You can't interject the chair, Floyd. You can interject everybody else. Okay, right. Can we have responses to what Floyd is saying?
We'll put heavier chairs so that you don't...
Don't what? Okay, fine.
Chair,
Floyd,
Chair, it's not necessarily responses to what Floyd is saying.
Yeah.
Floyd is actually responding to what Nikki said, that it is possible to legislate. Because that's the follow-up question I asked her, that it is possible, given the fact that the Scandinavian countries has actually adopted that type of a model. It's a matter that we will actually send back to National Treasury to look at the feasibilities and models of that. But Floyd raised a fundamental one on stockbrokering, which is a low-hanging fruit that you might want, which I don't believe.
That we might want.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
No,
that's, yeah.
In fact, there's hardly anything. So I think on that issue, there's a reasonable consensus about figures and so on. We won't agree. Secondly, I think what most of us, the DA, probably won't agree is that, look, these charters don't work. Well, they haven't delivered. And I think all of us agree there has to be more compulsion. What we have not come to a conclusion on, and we cannot prevaricate, is that do we want to legislate for it, or do we want to say, that's the other option I put before this committee, merely as a chair, it doesn't reflect my own views necessarily, that we want to say, okay, 24 months within which we want these targets achieved, failing which, hey, we legislate, right? That's the second option we've got. I'm just giving you the possibilities. There's a third option, which is to do a whole lot of other things in the report that we're doing, which will inevitably compel them to move in that direction of doing these things, and so on and so on. Now, what I also want to raise with colleagues here and comrades is that we must please avoid seeing this report as a once-all. All it's going to do tomorrow and in the 2 weeks' time, it'll finalize what we're calling the first tranche of the report. Bearing in mind, but let me deal with this tomorrow, right? But in a nutshell, I just want people to think about it so it saves time. I have spoken to Minister Kikava, I've spoken to Minister Davies, that we do not go ahead, and I've spoken to the Financial Sector Charter. I need to speak. We don't go ahead with the FSC Charter being gazetted. I hope you're listening, Tandi. They have stopped the Charter. Yeah, fine. You can talk. You can find outside this meeting now. We're rounding up. So let me remind you, I've spoken to the two ministers concerned. According to what they tell me, and Joan, they are not going to gazette the FSC revised one. They want to see what we come out with. That means we are under pressure to finish our report. Two, the Charter Council has approached me, and I've spoken to Joan. I don't want to raise anything. Let Joan speak about that matter. Thirdly, on the summit, we want all these issues. From what I hear, the two ministers and the Charter Council are fine that we put all our recommendations there. Now, there is an editorial appeared in Business Day that said, well, so why did you do these hearings if all you're doing is referring everything to the Charter? No. We are putting pressure that what goes into the new charter reflects more the sort of things we're saying. Secondly, what goes into the summit issues, the agenda. I'm now told by Treasury, I don't know whether Momo's been informed, that what we are saying will become part of the discourse of the summit, right? Thirdly, I want to stress that I really feel we're in a situation where we cannot take decisions on everything. So Floyd, you might get something 6 months down the road, which is more consensual than now. You also got to think about tactics and so on. So I think what we do is we do a further report within 6 months, and every 6 months we update the report. Because there are some things that we need. We can't as Parliament just go on our own and do our thing and feel good. Oh, we've been very revolutionary. NDR or whatever it is that they talk about. Is it Marxist, Leninist, Fanonism, or whether they drop Fanon? I don't know that Andil is left, but that's the EFF. We might feel good about it, colleagues, but why don't we do that? Move towards saying that this is merely, make it a final interim report or something, and we come back to it, so on. So that let's see what happens in the Charter, and let's see what happens in the summit, right? By April next year, these things will have been sorted out. But there's a second thing to say. It doesn't matter whether the Charter people agree with us or not. It doesn't matter whether the summit agrees. We are Parliament. We have a right to say what we want to say and put pressure on the executive and others. So that's what I'm urging people to. So Floyd, on your proposal that we legislate for all these things that you said, it's there. It says consider legislating after consultation. You're there. All you want to put it in the report now. But if you see you are covered, you've raised those issues, and we as the ANC at that stage tentatively said, in principle, we have no problem with what you're saying, we have to confer. There's also a policy, a conference coming up of the ANC in December that also means that, you know, people are wanting to take it through 3,500 delegates and so on. So there's nothing to hide. It's an open conference if it takes place, and so on, so it'll be done. I don't know what Derek is doing. Wonderful work, Derek. Wonderful.
Are you sure there will be a conference, Chair?
What?
Are you sure there's going to be a conference?
Yeah, well, I said if there's going to be a conference, right? But in any case, too. Don't pretend like you are outside there. Can I remind you of your last usually your CIC was elected? Ask Peace Mabe. Yeah, they started the thing. Right. Now that's their legacy. So what do you say, colleagues? I think, Floyd, you have more or less summarized where we all are as to how we couch it. And as to how far we go, when, I don't know, because I'm bound by an ANC mandate. But we are not that far, Floyd. We are not that far. Okay, do you want to say anything in particular? Having heard what Floyd did, for once he's acting like a chair, summarizing what the whole committee is. He thinks they've already won the 2019 election. That's the sort of Democrat he is. But leave that aside. What do you think?
Chair, just to clarify, I do think there is a space, a useful space for this committee to guide in relation to quotas on gender at board level. I'd like to make the point, though, that in relation to ownership, that's a very, very different policy space. Shares are traded freely. So being able to say, well, you have to have a minimum amount of shares that's the first problematic point. The second problematic point is that in order to diversify the investment available to South Africans, we have a whole lot of inward-listed, dual-listed companies. Okay, this allows South Africans to use their savings to invest in companies whose only business is not in this country. That's very useful risk management, mitigation that all of our pension funds are used to. As soon as we say, in order to be listed, you must have X amount of ownership and you must have a board that is X, that is Y black %, they won't be here. And that is a very serious consequence, I think, to consider. It is a different order of issue compared to gender. So while I think that that's the reason why the charters, etc., have this very useful check and balance incentive structure built into them, you can talk about whether or not they push enough in certain spaces. But at the heart of the charter mechanism is this incentive to transform satisfactorily if you are doing business in this country so that you actually can attract that business. Now, it's a different thing as to why you might want a company listed in order to provide investment diversification for us. So I think as the committee considers that, these are two different policy spaces. They are not in the same space. And I would caution anything that would require, by legislative fiat, a listed company to look have a certain racial breakdown in ownership or at the board level. For that reason, no one has to be listed. It's a choice as to be listed, and if they're going to be, if we make it such that we actually say, I don't need to be there, Mr. Big Company from overseas, they won't be here.
But I think this is a matter now we need to process.
Well, that's a political argument the CEO of JS is making. And will disagree fundamentally and everything else. But companies themselves, they set aside shares for black purchase and trading, like MTN, Zakele, Sasol Zalo, which ultimately drowned and everything else there. So you can say that it's just freely traded, all of it. It's not true. Like, there can be a guideline politically in terms of shares that are available for black people, because as things stand, the racial composition of the shareholders and those who are participating in that space, it's predominantly white. It's not reflective of the demographics of South Africa. And we've got an obligation in terms of Section 9(2) of the Constitution to pass legislation that redresses the imbalances of the past. Yes, but it's an obligation which all of us must embrace and have to fulfill, because the past 23 years have illustrated that anything else except legislation tends to fail dismally.
Right. Now, there it is. Thank you very much. Now it's for us to decide. We hear you, which is your right to speak. Now we have to take decisions, and we'll do it within the next 2 weeks, right? So you will give to us the outstanding matters by next Wednesday. Thank you very much. Now, on the final issues before we part, firstly, some in-house matters. 13:30, the lunch will be here. Okay, so there is lunch, people, for those of you who care to have it, 13:30. 2 is that we've got a problem that because, you know, you can excuse, if you want to stay, you're more than welcome, but if you want to go, you're more than welcome too. Secondly, what we have is a situation where, because there's so many committees that meet now with the BRRRs that all collide at once, we have to meet outside. Is that correct? But we are meeting jointly with trade and industry, right? So what Alan is rightly suggesting is that instead of us meeting outside Parliament and then trade and industry coming there, because they always, after they agree to the dates, then they have their own meetings. So they are starting at 9 and they're going to finish at 10:30, right? So what Alan is suggesting, we're going to join them at M314. M315 at 10:30 tomorrow. So we start at 10:30 tomorrow, M315. You'll send the SMS out. Okay. The next thing is what will happen in the afternoon, because that's our meeting. Where are we going to meet?
M314.
Oh, that's free now. Okay. Is it M314 or 315?
314 after lunch.
After lunch is 314. Yeah. Can you put that in bold if you can in the SMS system, right? Okay, because I get endless calls from members asking me where we're meeting. So that's that, right? Is there anything else in-house matters? Oh, we have sent out now to you Zakele's grid, which matrix, which sets out all the responses from the participants of the public hearings. Okay. Can the ANC comrades please remain behind? Thank you very much. Yeah.
And I know I walked in late. Just some clarity on tomorrow's program. Because I have some... I thought it was just a morning session that we're going to look at the HPL, but you talked of an afternoon session.
No, if you look at the program sent to Samuel gets the same program that we
Okay, no, I may just not have looked at
Yeah,
the
you
time.
not looked at the program.
Yeah.
The morning session, to remind members, is to do with a joint meeting with trade and industry on the FST hearings report. The afternoon is the other issues, HPL and so on, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's done. ANC comrades, please remain behind.
What's the FST?
Financial transformation.
Oh.
2 o'clock. In the morning.
Yeah, I'm not here in the afternoon. Yeah.
So there is a monitoring in the health profession levy from 2 o'clock.
How's it going?
Good, are you, Chris?
How's the new job? Well, it's been quite a while, actually.
Yeah, it's not that new anymore.
No.
Feeling a bit jaded.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, it's I mean, lots of demands, and so even though we work mostly with just the full committees.
Yeah.
Sorry. And there are basically 7 of us who do the analytical side of things. So yeah, but it's interesting, though, and I've become a generalist.
Yeah, I can imagine.
change from being an academic group, focuses on certain areas.
Right.
But I'm also trying to instill a sense